Hello Reddit, this will be my third post on the subreddit, so I feel confident in saying that I might have some sort of gift I like to call the creeper magnet. Now, might be a good time to mention that I am female. Anyway, this summer started off with a trip to a very prestigious university for what is basically nerd camp. Most people there were actually very lovely, except for a handful of rather strange, sex-starved, or just plain socially awkward individuals who made comments that would send chills down almost anyone's spine. For example, one boy piped a comment about how we really shouldn't have any qualms about secretly injecting people's water supply with numerous biological chemicals as a means of testing what is suitable for biological warfare. Another brought a roll of what looked like 10,000 condoms and eagerly showed my roommate and I in a coffee shop with the biggest grin on his face. One of my 3 roommates also had a particular habit of waking up in the wee hours of the morning, getting dressed, hopping back in bed, and then darting out the door without even a hello as soon as any of us had woken up. The only real physical issues I had were at the final dance when us biochem kids were introduced to the engineers. I hate to bag on them since most of my brother's friends, including his wife, were engineers, but these kids were ridiculously creepy. I was followed the whole night by one kid who kept trying to teach me how to feel the beat in my veins and had my wrist grabbed by another kid I only met the first day. This is not even the worst of it. I've yet to introduce you to Brett. Brett is what my roommates and I described as the dictionary definition of a tool/douchebag upon first impression. He stuck out like a sore thumb among the sea of acne-riddled teens in oversized glasses and pants that were far too big, even with a belt. He came from money, unlike most of us, and liked to let everybody know how superior he was to everybody. He sat alone all the bus rides, and, until my roommates and I finally approached him, only mingled with his fellow Pennsylvanian, Drew, since they went to the same high school. He liked to brag about how long it would take him to get ready, and how he probably spent more time on his hair than any girl he knew. He was ridiculously good looking and he knew it. On one particular bus ride, the two of us managed to be stuck together when we got on late. His response was rude. "Man, I don't know if I can do this." I read silently next to him as he scrolled through Instagram pics. Glancing over, I saw one of him and another girl in formal attire, most likely for a dance. I saw this as an opportunity to initiate small talk, so I asked if it was his girlfriend. "Nah, none of these are my dates." He showed me his Facebook pictures of him with other girls in fancy outfits. There were close to a dozen. To be honest, I hate all these girls. He then showed me some picture of him at concerts, parties, and other random places, always with a girl at his side. "They're so dumb," he continued. "I know they like me, but I just hate all of them. I'll usually take them out when I'm bored, and we'll get hammered and then hook up, but that's it. I could never date any of them. Hell, I can't even hook up when I'm sober." I was past the point of being slightly uncomfortable. The way he was speaking about these girls was beyond fucked up. He described several hookups in very intricate detail, and referred to the girls as though they were pieces of meat. Then, the real crazy began. "I like to take these girls out to parties, and then get them super drunk. I'll take care of them at first, help them to the bathroom, hold their hair back when they throw up. Then I like to pull them back and shove them in their vomit, kick their face in it, spin on them, and then say, 'Fuck you.' These girls, you know, they're so fucking dumb." If I hadn't been so shocked by the words he just spoke, I probably would have said something like, "What the fuck, Brett? You're a disgusting piece of shit." But all I could respond with was just a stare equally as emotionless as his. I think he found that intriguing, maybe a little comforting, maybe a little attractive, because the rest of his trip he spent in my presence. He would often talk to me about how I was different, how I didn't give a shit just like him. He would tell me his stories about belittling and dehumanizing women as though I admired them. To be honest, I didn't say much because I didn't even know how to respond. He was a maniac, and he really got off on treating girls like garbage. He got off on reliving those memories too. We had the strangest level of friendship because I was so disgusted with him, and at the same time, he was such an attractive person. He was extremely charismatic, had a great sense of humor, and an extremely intelligent individual. There was something off about him though, and it was only because of what he had disclosed to me that I feel I was able to keep up with it. His eyes, piercing blue, were so empty and cold. When talking about personal topics or tragic events, he never missed a beat with a sympathetic reply, but it was so disingenuous. I discussed the topic with my roommates, and we came to the conclusion that Brett was a sociopath, a narcissist, or some type of other psychopath, and no matter how attractive, we should all stay away. After the camp ended, I never thought I would see him again, and he would simply be a creepy story to tell friends. That was not the case. My final trip of the summer, you better believe it, was to accompany my best friend, Pam, on her annual trip to visit her dad in Pennsylvania. Somewhere in these wooded forests lurked a monster by the name of Brett. I had no intention of meeting up with him, but I did plan on meeting up with his friend, Drew. We had hit it off during camp, sharing many of the same interests and hobbies. He told me before we left, if I was ever in PA or DC, I should let him know, and he would be more than happy to meet up. Although he and Brett hung out at camp, I knew they weren't friends back at home. They were far too different. Drew was a freckly, paper-white ginger who was 5'10" and maybe 135 pounds at the most. He played video games and hiked for fun. Not to mention, Brett specifically told me that he hated Drew. Apparently, Brett believed Drew was trying too hard to be like him. That was most definitely not true. So Drew, Pam, and I go hiking around this town. I don't ask about Brett when Drew mentions him, but my best friend is dying to meet him after everything I told her. Drew says he can invite us to a party, and then we can all catch up. We ended up going, since apparently Pam thought spending the night making venison jerky wasn't a preferable alternative to meeting a crazy man. The party ends up being something out of my nightmares. Raging college kids, alcohol, weed, sex, everything that makes me want to hide in a corner. Pam was having a blast, and so far I managed to avoid consuming any of the drinks Brett was shoving into my hands. He was staying way too close to me the whole night, trying to pull me away with him when I sat on couches, grazing my ass when I stood up next to him. At one point, he pressed me against the wall and forcefully kissed my neck before his not date came around and got very pissy with both of us. I hid from him the rest of the night. Eventually, the party began breaking up because someone got wind that the cops were coming. Drew was rushing me to the car, but I couldn't find Pam anywhere. I looked in the bathroom and found Pam flipping her shit and dragging me to the tub. In the tub, there was Brett's date. She was surrounded by vomit, and her face and lips were palish blue. Both of us began freaking out because she wasn't breathing. I called Drew, and he raced into the house, and the three of us dragged her out to the front and called for an ambulance. Drew was pretty stoned, but told us to wait in the car, and he would explain everything to the cops since he didn't want us to get in trouble. The cops came and questioned everybody at the scene. The girl was taken away, and Pam ended up having to call her dad to come pick us up. The next day, I called Drew, and he told me the girl was alright. He had also talked to Brett, who seemed completely unfazed by everything. Apparently she passed out while they were fooling around in the basement, so he took the liberty of dumping her in the bathtub, where he knew someone would find her. She was his friend. Then, apparently after that, he split because he didn't want to get in trouble for underage drinking. I know that the world is a fucked up place, and people can be downright evil, but to witness this firsthand is rather nauseating. Brett is only 18. It terrifies me to think about what he will be capable of in only a few years. So, let's all hope that we never ever have to meet the soulless eyes of Brett. Ever. Been lurking on here for a while, but thought I would share my story here. When I started college in 2011, I formed a solid friendship group and threw myself into the social life. One guy in my block, who always showed up to parties but never spoke much to anyone, was a classic neckbeard, overweight, anime fan, lacking in social skills, combined with awkward attempts to be overconfident. He also never bathed himself, wore stained gray clothes that never changed, had long, lanky, greasy hair, and was surrounded by a cloud of BO. It would enter the room before he did. Sorry if this description sounds unnecessarily mean. I wouldn't normally judge people for these things in themselves, but combined with his behavior since, it is frankly warranted. With regret in hindsight, I made the mistake of chatting with him at one of these parties. with the aim of being friendly and helping him get more integrated into the group. From that moment on, a switch flipped in him, and he began obsessively stalking me, which would go on for the rest of freshman year. He would try to isolate me at social events, talking to me for hours, and taking none of my cues that I wanted to bring it to a close. If I tried to lose him, he would find me. If I spent time with my actual friends, he would follow and force his way into a conversation, following me around like a wasp on a mission. If he saw me in public, he would give me this 1,000-yard, unblinking stare, even from a couple hundred meters away, and would come over. It got to the point that I felt some kind of tracker on me, because wherever I was, he would appear, even when leaving the campus library at 3 a.m. More than once at night, I looked through the spy hole in my door to the hall outside to see him standing there, staring intensely at my door. Obviously, this was seriously creepy behavior. I felt hunted. I was frightened and on alert all the time, and I started to avoid going out of my room. I also started going to my folks a lot so I could just get out of town. My friends were worried about me, and a couple of them confronted him about his behavior and asked him to leave me alone. This did not go down well. His obsession turned into rage. Thankfully, he kept more of a distance, but he would still hang in places he knew I would be, staring at me with intense hatred. He started telling everybody that I was his girlfriend and had dumped him in a horrible, cruel way. It made me question myself that a few people actually believed him. This continued into our sophomore year, when he got close to one of my housemates and started turning up unannounced at our place. This friend believed the stories he was telling and thought that I was being unfair in asking not to bring him around the house. He ended up stealing my mail, including a new bank card. I had no evidence that it was him, but I had so much stuff go missing and I knew he was doing this. I also found him once in my bedroom. That was the last straw, and my roommate finally accepted that this guy had been lying. When I moved away, the in-person stuff stopped, but he started cyber-stalking me, trying daily to hack any of my accounts that he could find. This continued, though to a lesser extent, for a period of 3 years, but since then, everything seemed to die down, and I thought it was over. I recently found his blog, where he writes fantasy stories about our relationship, and he calls me the love of his life, and this is more than 10 years later. I hope I never meet this weird neckbeard guy again. I used to work at Advanced Auto Parts as a delivery driver and was one of the 4 only women that worked there at the time. 2 of them were middle-aged and the third was decently older. All 3 being have there for a decent amount of time. So basically, I'm the new, young, pretty girl who knows her way around a car in a predominantly male work environment. That alone comes with its own set of issues, but it was nothing I hadn't dealt with before. On my first day, I made an instant friend with Jeremy. He was laid back, funny, and good at his job without being overbearingly professional. I guess that's why it kind of struck me when he looked at me seriously and told me to watch myself around Louis. Now, let's talk about Louis for a second. He was probably in his late 40s or early 50s, definitely old enough to be my dad. He wore glasses with the big 70s wire frames, had scraggly gray hair that poked from under his hat that were greasy and curly, and his teeth were stained brown from the years of dipping tobacco and apparently never owning a toothbrush. He had a slew of youngins, in his own words, and referred to his wife as his old lady, a picture-perfect example of what folks around here called white trash. But I was raised not to judge people and was friendly with him nonetheless. I just figured he was kind of a typical old pervert that was kind of creepy around younger women. Things were going well until about 3 months into working there when I hit a deer with my car, completely destroying the front end. As circumstance would have it, 2 days before that, my then boyfriend wrecked and totaled his truck as well, leaving us with no way to go. A few days after the accident, ex-boyfriend decided that he was better off moving back in with his mom and left. We had just moved in together and now I was going to be living alone in an apartment with no car and my family on the other side of town. With much protest from my mother, I began walking to and from work while trying to rebuild my car, as I only lived about 3 miles from the store and the small city I lived in had no means of public transport. Obviously, The people at work noticed that I was walking back and forth and offered me a few rides home and to come get me in the mornings, but I always declined. I honestly enjoyed the walk. One day, as I was about to walk out of the parking lot and around to the back of the building, Louie came around the front corner, hand in the air to flag me down. "Where you going, girlie?" he asked, his voice thick with a Cajun accent. "Heading home for the day, man. I'll see y'all tomorrow," I replied. "You know, I could give you a ride home if you wanted. Maybe even let you drive my baby." He had a brand new Mustang GT, matted black, and he thought it was the shit. "Is that right?" I joked, both of us knowing there's no way in hell I'm getting in a car with him. "Yeah, for sure. You just can't tell anybody about it, though." Okay, that was a weird comment to make. Hoping for the best, I said, "What? Tell them you let me drive?" Chuckling, he said, "Nah, that you was ever with me at all." I don't like put myself out there like that, you know? No, I didn't know, and I was genuinely creeped out at that point. I laughed it off awkwardly and just walked away. Once I was sure he was out of sight, I pulled my pocket knife out of my backpack and put it in my pocket for a better sense of security. After that, Louis just got progressively weirder. He would follow me outside for my smoke breaks, even though he didn't smoke. He offered to take me home a few more times, always under the premise that I would keep it between the two of us, even making it a point to let me know that he knew which apartment complex I lived in, not just which building. I was already past the point of being creeped out, but I didn't want to make a fuss about it at work. I was already going through enough in my personal life already. I was still relatively new to the job, and Louis had worked there for years with no issues other than that he was known to be a weird dude. But the breaking point came when I got scheduled for a closing shift, just me and Louis. I dreaded it the entire week, but again, I didn't want to cause a big issue at work. After all, he hadn't done anything to me, and I hadn't told him just to leave me alone or anything. He was just so fucking weird. The day of our closing shift finally rolled around, and I was ready to have it over with. I had already arranged for a male friend to come pick me up that night, since the store closed after dark, and I was already pretty sure that Louis had followed me home at least once by this point. How else would he have known where I live? I'm careful not to divulge where I live, just to anybody. 5:30 came around and everybody left for the day, leaving me alone with Louis. We closed at 8, so I only had to make a couple of hours with him, and it would be over. While business was steady, everything was fine. But after about 7, there wasn't a single customer in the store. We were chatting with each other, just normal coworker small talk, when he asked how my ex and I were doing. He knew that when I got hired, I had a boyfriend, but I obviously hadn't updated him to my new relationship situation. We split up, I told him simply. He couldn't deal with neither of us having a vehicle. Louis said something I'm sure he thought was wise about a couple who struggle together, blah blah blah. I smiled and agreed with him and hoped we could change the subject now. Instead, he moved closer to me. I automatically flinched slightly as he began to speak again, so close to my face I could smell his breath. "This is why you need a real man, honey. You know, a grown man." He put his hand on my lower back, and I sidestepped his touch. My mind was screaming at me to get the hell out, but was that even an option? Yes, this was definitely inappropriate and overstepped the boundaries of the workplace, but there were no cameras in the store. Would anyone even believe me? He laughed and asked if I was uncomfortable. I decided just to be honest, and I told him I was. There was no use in lying. I knew my body language had given away my nervousness. He apologized casually and walked off to the back of the store, behind the battery rack and out of sight. I took this opportunity to text my friend and tell him to go ahead and come to the store and wait for me outside, quickly recounting what had just happened. Louis emerged with the push broom, and I realized it was 7:35. Thank God, only a little while longer. As he was sweeping and I was cleaning up around parts of the counter, Louis started up a conversation again. We were still the only two in the store. "Yeah, I didn't mean to freak you out or anything earlier, you know?" "Yeah, man, I know. It was just kind of inappropriate for work." "Yeah, you right. If we was out on town now, that'd be a different story though, huh? I mean, it'd be more appropriate than at work, but we work together, man. It's just weird. Ain't nothing weird about a man and a woman having a good time, girlie." This guy was just not taking the hint. I didn't know how to say it, so I just stopped responding. But Louis didn't stop talking. He told me we could go out of town if I didn't want people seeing us together. We would keep it a secret. We could have fun. He knows how to show a lady a good time. His cousin works the front desk at a motel out by the interstate. He'd give him a room under a fake name, no questions asked. I just stared ahead and out the front doors, desperately waiting for my ride to get here. I was beyond caring about my reputation at work. I'd deal with the consequences later, but for now, I gotta leave as soon as possible. I grabbed my backpack so that I could bolt out as soon as I saw headlights in the parking lot. Suddenly, hot breath was on the back of my neck, and Louis standing right behind me. I could feel him grinding right up on me. "You know, I could do you real good, right?" he whispered breathily into my ear, sending chills of fear and nausea down my entire body. I ran out from behind the counter and out the front door. My ride wasn't there yet, but I didn't care, and I didn't slow down as I sprinted through the parking lot and out into the darkness. I ran in the opposite direction than I knew my friend would be coming, and he picked me up from the side of the road almost a mile from the store. My manager called and called, but I never answered or replied, and I never went back. I did, however, keep in touch with Jeremy, and he told him about what happened that night and all the events that led up to it. About 6 months after I left, Jeremy sent me a link to an article from our town's online newspaper. Louis' wife, mother, and grandmother were all arrested for sexually assaulting his daughter. But no one can convince me that Louis didn't know it was happening. Louis, let's never meet again. I hate that we ever met in the first place. This happened literally a month ago, back in November, when my boyfriend and I had decided to try an open relationship for a while for various reasons. We live separately in one of the larger cities in the north of Middle America, and there's a decently sized population of college students like me to keep the gay community fresh, so I was doing pretty well for myself. One early November night, I was bored and scrolling through Grindr, looking for an easy hookup, when I got a message from a guy who was barely 800 feet away. He wasn't terrible looking, and I was a little desperate, so I agreed to go to his place. He lives quite literally down the street from me. I can see his building from my window, so I walked over. He let me up and into his apartment. We made small talk, and I mentioned where I lived. Hell, I even pointed out my window from one of the windows in the stairwell. From the first, I thought there was something off about the guy. Not necessarily bad, just different. An odd twitch in his hands when he gripped the banister. The vacancy of his eyes when he smiled. I'm not so cliche as to say he, quote, felt evil or anything like that. But I wasn't exactly surprised that after we got to his apartment, the first thing he did was tell his very pretty and friendly cat to say hello, and the second thing he did was walk over to the kitchen counter, grab a needle, and shoot up. I hadn't even closed the door behind me. I stood there, staring, and he turned around, dropped the needle on the counter, and went, "Oh shit, man, should've asked, you cool with that? I'm not a good Christian boy. I've broken into a church while tripping on LSD. I had sex on a headstone back in high school, but I've my standards now." So I just shook my head mutely, pulled my hat back on, and opened the door to leave. The guy rushed over, put a hand on my shoulder, and said, "Yo, I'm sorry, you don't gotta go. We don't gotta do it. Do you just want to watch Transformers 3 with me or something?" "Nope," I said bluntly, hustling away down the stairs. I bundled up my scarf against the early November chill and huddled down the street to my apartment. He followed me downstairs, barefoot, in pajama pants and t-shirt, until I stepped outside into the whipping winds. I turned back briefly to look after a moment, and he was still standing there in the doorway, watching me. I didn't have any impending feelings of doom or weirdness. I grew up in Missouri. Junkies barely register as odd to me by this point, so I went home and went to bed. Now, you might have guessed it, but I'd never seen this dude around the neighborhood before. Truthfully, I haven't seen most of my neighbors because my neighborhood is an odd mixture of white-collar suburbia, college housing, and low-income housing, so it didn't really register when I started seeing him more. I'd leave for work in the afternoon, and he'd be on the other avenue across the building, strolling along, or he'd cut across my building's parking lot like all the kids in the neighborhood did. A couple of times I saw him walking across the campus mall. My apartment is directly adjacent to my campus, but he'd always swerve to avoid me. Once or twice, I noticed him in a grocery store I work at as a barista, but It's the only one with a walking distance, and he mentioned he didn't have a car. This went on for the entire month of November. Eventually I started noticing. He'd always be walking down the street opposite my building when I left for work at my usual time, and he was only ever at the store when I was working. He never approached a coffee stand within the store where I work, but he'd always look at me. A couple times I noticed him enter, look at me, pretend to shop, and leave without buying anything. I was starting to feel creeped out, but he hadn't done anything yet to make me feel particularly unsafe. One day, late November, I worked an early shift. When I got off, I felt a little crazy from lack of sleep, and I reached my place about 20 minutes before I usually leave for work, and on the corner of the sidewalk opposite me was the guy. He was checking his watch over and over and looking up. I did a bit of brilliant deductive analysis and followed his gaze up to my living room window. Then I looked back down at him. He looked right at me. There was a moment of tension as we stared at each other in the eyes. Like I said, this dude didn't give off any evil or dark vibes. I've met people that do. No, what I saw in this guy's eyes and his face was much more human and much scarier. Desperation, loneliness, pain, and anger. He hurried after me, but I'm 6'3" and a former sprinter, where he was a 5'8" junkie wearing flip-flops on ice. I made it to the first set of doors to my apartment, scanned myself in through the second, and locked them behind me. He walked through the unlocked first set, tried to open the second, tried pushing the handicap button to open them, and then gave up. "Look, man, I'm sorry," he shouted, laying a hand on the glass of the door. "Can we talk about it?" I shook my head. "Absolutely not. Leave me alone." Then I stomped over to the elevator. When I turned back, he was gone out into the snow. I didn't see him for a couple weeks afterward, which is nice because my boyfriend likes to walk down the street past the dude's apartment when he stays over and needs to go smoke. One night, when he was over at my place, he'd just gone out to smoke before we went to bed, and he mentioned that he wanted me to come out with him next time he went out. "Why?" I asked, pulling him in closer to me while he shivered. "It's dark and cold. I get paranoid out there sometimes," he mumbled onto my chest. "There's a creepy dude that sometimes stands in the corner across the way and just stares at the building. One time, he even asked me for a cig, and I told him I didn't have one when I literally had one in my hand." I laughed, kissed his chin, and passed out. I laid there awake, troubled. When I was sure my boyfriend was deeply asleep, meaning after about 5 minutes had passed, I got up and went to the window. It was a cold, clear night. I could see across the street. Under the orange glow of the street light was the guy. I couldn't make him out clearly, but when he saw me, he waved. I flipped him off and closed the blinds. I didn't feel like I should tell my boyfriend, because he's either going to immediately go to the police, which I hate doing, or he tried to defend me, and while I love him with my entire heart, I don't want to watch a fight between a junkie stalker and my underweight, nicotine-addicted boyfriend, so I kept it to myself, and still haven't told him. But I did start to accompany him when he went out to smoke. The guy was usually outside. Sometimes he'd follow us for a bit before ducking away down some side street. Sometimes he'd watch us from a distance. Sometimes he'd be up in his apartment. My boyfriend never noticed. I kept my composure, and nothing really happened. One night, though, we went out so my boyfriend could smoke, like normal. When we reached the end of the street and turned around, the stalker was behind us, about 50 feet back. I turned my head to check, and there he was. He waved at me again, and something told me I had to get back inside. "Hey babe," I said quietly to my boyfriend. "Let's get back inside." "Yeah, I'm cold." "Okay, I'm almost done anyway," he replied. We walked back to the apartment building, and without turning, I knew the stalker was behind us the entire time. I kept my hand intertwined with my boyfriend's and kept up the casual conversation we'd been having about how I hate geese. We got back to my apartment and he got changed for bed. Well, I gripped some water. So I've never lived in an apartment before, and I don't know if it's odd or not, but this building has a wired telephone at each unit that rings when someone wants let in. Ours never rings unless it's Uber Eats, so my boyfriend was surprised when it started ringing late at night when neither of us had ordered anything. "Probably just some asshole playing a prank," I said, unhooking the phone from the wall and putting it in the kitchen cabinet. He accepted that without a struggle, and we'd lay down in bed. After he was soundly out, I got up, got dressed, grabbed a couple things, and headed downstairs in my thick winter coat. Sure enough, my fanboy was there in the parking lot. He waved and jogged over to me, smiling broadly. "Hey man, what do you want?" I said flatly. "Look man, I feel like we ended things awkwardly last time, and I just wanted to tell you," he said. "So you stalked me?" "What?" He started to look angrier. "Nah man, I didn't stalk you. I just wanted to know when I could talk to you, but you always avoid me. Now you're walking around out here with that skinny bitch boy trying to rub up in my face, and I don't fucking appreciate that. Look man," he said, smiling again, stepping closer. "Do you want to go talk about this in the back of my place? Ditch the white boy and come hang out with me tonight, please? I won't shoot up or anything this time." He took another step closer to me. I saw in his right hand a small piece of metal, a folded up switchblade. He smiled at me, and I stepped back, shaking my head. His smile drained away into a deep scowl. "Bitch, I'm done asking you. You're gonna come over to my place right now and finish what we started," he growled, unfolding the knife and pointing it at me. This dude was 5'8" tops and skinny, and I'm 6'3", 200 pounds, and regularly lift weights. Also, I have a 12-inch kitchen knife, which I drew from my coat pocket and leveled at his throat. He looked at my knife and back at his and smiled again. Bro, I was just playing. We don't gotta. We can just talk right here, bro." I didn't let him finish. "Leave me my boyfriend alone," I said, very quietly, "or I'll cut your face off and eat it." "What the fuck?" he replied. "I spent 8 years in juvie for stabbing a kid in middle school," I lied. He backed up, putting the knife back in his pocket. I took a step closer, holding my knife level. He backed away quickly, almost falling on the ice, until he was full sprinting back to his place, and I was chasing him down with my knife until he crossed the street, and I stopped, slid the knife in my pocket, and watched him run back to his building. Then I went back up to my bedroom, told my boyfriend I just had to go pee, and fell asleep. So nameless horny junkie, let's not meet again. Or like I said, I'll just have to eat your face. Hey, for the record, I'm a female. I'm turning 19 this year, and the story happened when I was 15. Oh, and also, I'm from France, which can explain my English mistakes if there are any. When I was 15 years old and just got into my junior year, I created my first Twitter account that I deleted because of this story. Some information: I didn't tell anyone my username, neither my family nor friends, because I didn't have any. My profile picture was an avatar, so no pictures of me on the account, and as location, I said Paris because I lived in the suburbs. I did not have many followers, 20 or 30 maybe, and I didn't follow that much people, so my TL was not really interesting. One evening in October, someone sent me a quite strange direct message. It was a 200 followers account, and the message was, "Hi, my name is Rob. I just turned 17 and wanted to know if you lived in blank because I will soon move in and go to the town high school, and I'm looking for friends." Blank was obviously the town I lived in. I immediately thought something was wrong because there was nowhere in my profile I said where I actually lived. But after some time thinking, I remembered of a tweet I made weeks ago about buses, and I mentioned the city, so I told myself he just looked up my city and found my tweet. His age wasn't shocking because I'm in 2 years ahead of my classmates. I was bored, and he was polite. I answered him. I told him I indeed lived in the town and go to high school there. The discussion was natural, and we talked a lot that night, mainly about high school, about the food at the cafeteria, about the teachers, that kind of thing. But it was getting very late. He tried to interpose some personal questions like, do you live far away from the school, in a house or an apartment? Do you live with both your parents? There's 5 of you? You're not often home alone, right? I never answered because it was way too shady for me, and unfortunately, he didn't insist. Unfortunately, because if he did, I would have probably blocked him just then and there. The next day, same thing. We talked a lot, and he was still asking personal questions to get to know me better, he would say. So I asked him some too, and he always answered with what I seemed was honesty. I still didn't answer the questions about my house though, because he didn't need to know anything. It lasted 2 or 3 weeks, but it was enough for me to develop feelings for him. He He was handsome, super kind, and it was everything I needed. Because I was bullied for years, and even today, I still develop strong feelings, but most importantly, blind trust in people who are friendly to me. In France, in October, we have a 2-week-long vacation, and the day before back to school day, he finally told me he was coming to my high school because he finally moved in with his mom, and he asked me a place to meet during the morning break. I was so happy and relieved to be able to meet him, and told him to join me in the hall. But when he understood that the place would be around people, he said he would prefer an isolated place because he was afraid he would not recognize me and didn't want to spend the break looking for me. It was a good excuse for me, so I told him to meet me in the 3rd floor bathroom because we weren't allowed to stay during the breaks and no one would disturb us. In my head, even though it was a bit creepy, I was still in school, so nothing could happen to me. Next day, back to school day, I made myself pretty, wore my best clothes, and counted down the minutes, and finally, when break time arrived, I ran to the bathroom and waited. And when he arrived, it was him. He was not a catfish. He looked quite like his profile picture, but I still noticed that he seemed a bit older than he had told me. I thought 20 years old instead of 17 like he said. We talked a lot. We got along well. I was so pleased. And at the end of break, he asked me to go to the fast food chain with him for lunch. I said no because I didn't have any money and I always refused for people to pay for me. It's a principle. He seemed disappointed, but offered me a walk home after class. I explained I have to take the bus, but that he could walk me to the bus stop. He looked disappointed again, but finally accepted. That's exactly what happened, and it was so great that it quickly became some kind of routine. We met in the 3rd floor bathroom during the morning break, and he walked me to my bus stop after class. Surprising fact, I never saw him in the hallways nor cafeteria, but I thought at the time the building was huge, and there was over 1,500 students in there, so if our schedules didn't match, there's no way we could meet each other. This little game lasted until December, so almost a month and a half later, the 14th of December, a Thursday, I complained about how lonely I was going to be that evening because my dad was gone for work, my brother was always at his friend's house, and my little sister won a school trip, and my mom had to work late. It was very reckless of me, but after weeks, I thought I could trust him. That evening, he walked me to the bus stop. We both waited. I got in the bus, waved at him, and put my earphones on. I had 2 stops before my house. It was about 6:45 in December, so it was already really dark outside, and as I got out the bus, I had a really bad feeling. There was that very uncomfortable sensation on my stomach, and I felt like I was being observed. I pressed pause on my music, but kept my earphones on, so that people thought I couldn't hear anything, and that's probably what saved my life. I lived in a suburban neighborhood, very silent, especially at night, with no visibility on the big road the bus passed in. When I heard footsteps behind me, I understood I was right. There was someone following me, and he was not well intended. At least I could hear that he was not accelerating, so I could tell he was not trying to catch up to me, but sneak behind me. As quietly as possible, I tried to reach for my keys in my pocket, and when I finally pulled them out, I ran as fast as I could. The best sprint of my life. I don't know how it worked, but I managed to open and close the door before he could reach me. I then deactivated my alarm, which by the way confirmed that I was home alone, and took a look through the glass panel on the door. It was not a peephole, it was a whole window, so if someone wanted to see what's happening inside, they can. It was Rob, a few meters away looking at me with a really creepy face. He followed me to my home, probably with a car, and he was clearly not here for chit-chat. I still don't know why I didn't call the police. I was totally paralyzed. We both stared at each other for a minute, and then I took back control over my body. I ran to the kitchen to get a knife, and I got to the door. He was there too, banging against the door. I feared for a second that the glass would break, but it didn't happen. That moment, when I was pushing against the door, praying for it not to break while he was kicking harder and harder, it was the longest amount of time I've ever experienced. Maybe about 5 minutes later, he stopped. He got around the house, knocking against every shutter, and then back to the door. He looked at me very angry, but then my neighbor's car reached my house, and Rob ran away, probably thinking it was my mom coming home. On Twitter, Rob sent me thousands of messages before I could block him. He then deleted his account, and I thought I was done with the story. But quickly after, some accounts which have just been created followed me, and their were all series and numbers, and the first letter was of his name, and as soon as I blocked one, another one followed me. I chose to delete my account because I couldn't make it stop, and it was too hard to endure because they were sending me dozens of insulting DMs. Later, I talked to people who were supposed to be Rob's classmates because I haven't seen him in days, but not a single one ever heard about Rob. This guy was never a student at my high school. That's why I never met him apart from the daily meetings, and that is probably why he seems so old. I never heard about him anymore. I'm still asking myself what he did want, and what could have happened that night. So Rob, let's not meet again. I recently made a post and remembered a fun encounter that might go as a warning to those who work late at night. I was a 24-year-old at the time, working at a nightclub about 10 minutes away from my house, walking distance. I used to close on Tuesday nights slightly earlier than most nights, as it was generally our slowest night of the week, closing at around 12 instead of keeping customers until like 2:30 in the morning like usual. Usually I'd be the only one left, as I'd start cutting staff as the night went on, and since it was the slower day of the week, we didn't have security on. About 2 months in of regularly closing at 12, I was walking home. I used to bring in bulkier clothes to hide my figure when leaving alone, as I've been followed and chased home multiple times before, and we'd often get men waiting outside after hours for us girls to come out, knowing we'd eventually come out after closing, and didn't want to attract attention to myself. I also used to walk home as I didn't have a car, and had a few terrifying experiences with Uber drivers not actually driving me home, turning out to be fake cabs/Uber drivers, or harassing me until I pretend to show interest, or give them some way of contacting me, to which Uber would just give me $5 coupons for the trouble, but that's a story for another time. The bar was located along a main road that was home to the majority of the other bars and restaurants in the city downtown. Often at this time, I'd maybe see a handful of people, but the streets were generally empty. I'm walking and I notice a parked car about a block away. The driver noticed his car. I don't engage and keep walking. We're maybe a block or two past the initial spot I saw him, and he's slowly driving alongside the sidewalk. I'd cross the street, but didn't want to get near his car. He keeps us up until about the halfway mark, when he takes off in his car, and I'm just relieved he's gone. Psych. Guess who comes back blasting down the road? He does. Now my walk has turned into a light jog, which then turns into a full-on sprint. I'm running behind closed bars and businesses now, trying to find a back route to get home without him seeing where I live. At one point, I'm running through bushes and mud. No matter what street I end up on, his car is waiting for me. Eventually, I run right in front of his car while it's parked on the side street beside my place and run into my house through the back entrance. The back entrance is obscured by plenty of trees and cars in the surrounding houses, so I was confident he didn't see what door I got in through. Fast forward to the following Tuesday, and I'm walking home again. Guess whose car's parked at the halfway mark? This went on for the next 4 Tuesdays, except he started parking on the street in front of my house until I begged my manager to take me off closing that specific shift. The last time I saw him, one of the apartment buildings along the way had a few cop cars and cops standing around the entrance. I stayed with them, and it made him drive off for the night. A week passes and I'm no longer on that shift. A coworker of mine sends me a news article via text. I open it and see that the man who's been following me was arrested for doing this to multiple girls in the city along the street my work was on and that I lived on. He got caught because he'd followed a university student up to our house and wouldn't drive away. She called the cops, and he was still there by the time they came to arrest him. He got out the next day, I believe, and was arrested a few more times and was put on restrictions. Couldn't be outside of his parents' house between certain hours unaccompanied by either parent. That was all before he was deported. I've also heard he didn't actually get deported, but I moved away shortly after and didn't keep up with the news on him. I can link the article if anyone wants. I don't live there anymore and wouldn't be giving myself away, so to the creep in the car who used to follow me and multiple other young women home, let's never meet again. I'm currently a 27-year-old female. At the time this story occurred, I was a senior in high school, angsty and steadily into partying. For this story, I'm going to hide her identity, solely due to the rules on Reddit. Let's call her Kay. Kay almost cost me my life, and I never want to see her again. A little backstory on Kay. She grew up privileged, given anything she wanted. Her parents adopted her 5 cousins, and this is when she started to rebel. Her parents, well off, started to pay less attention to her, so Kay had all the freedom in the world. At the time this incident occurred, Kay was 18 and I had just turned 18. We were headed to kick back at these guys' houses, and nothing more than a little bit of weed was expected. No, I had my share in smoking weed, popping pills here and there. I had just tried ecstasy the summer prior. However, I was planning on staying sober. She had picked me up, and we stopped to buy cigs at a gas station. I bought a fountain drink, one with a straw and everything. This is crucial for later in the story. We arrive at the apartment and everyone is smoking, including Kay, but I declined. She would always say shit how she never wanted to be high alone, complain about how I never got high as her, so I obliged, and I cleared the bong off her hit, not even taking a full hit. She asked for a drink of my soda and I handed it to her. She had it for a good minute. I had my head turned, talking to someone at the kickback. When I looked back at Kay, she was messing with my straw. I didn't think much of it, and she handed it back to me. Within about 30 minutes or so, I started to feel intensely high, to the point that I needed to escape from the group. I go out front to smoke a cigarette, only to find that I couldn't stand up, so I laid on the front porch. Then all of these dark thoughts flashed through my mind. I felt so sick, like my stomach was being torn open. I couldn't stand. I had to crawl to the bushes to throw up. I thought to myself, all of this off clearing a bong? So I laid back on the porch. The apartment was located on a busy street in the city I lived in. I also thought about running into traffic because I felt like I was dying. So I gave myself 2 options. I could run into traffic, have a car hit me, and end this horrible pain I was in, or I could get some help, maybe flag someone down. My mind wasn't in the right state. I knew nobody at the kickback would take me seriously. I knew something was terribly wrong. I thought about calling my mom. I must have had dialed her number and hung up like 5 different times. Finally, I called and told her what had happened, and I didn't know why I was so high. Nobody else was feeling the way I felt. What seemed like an eternity later, Kay came outside looking for me. As I'm puking my guts out into the bushes, she asked me if I want to get some food. I asked her if she was fucking serious. She laughed as I puked. What I didn't know is that my mother had called my older brother to pick me up, since he lived close to where I was. He showed up with a machete, ran inside, and threatened people. He didn't know who gave me what. It wasn't until I got home that my brother took one look at my eyes and noticed how dilated my pupils were, so he rushed me to the ER, after more puking, of course. My memory there was a bit fuzzy. I just remember asking my sister-in-law if I was going to die and telling her that I was scared. They ended up sedating me due to the fact that I was yelling and threatening the nurses. Totally out of character for me. They did a tox screen, drug test, and found MDMA, the drug found in ecstasy, along with other drugs in my system. I'm assuming the other drugs were the ones used to make up the ecstasy. Now, this is all frightening and everything. However, what I found out a few days later shocked me to my core. Kay had been to a house party the next night. Somebody there said she was passing out free ecstasy to 4 different people. Of those 4 people, 3 had literal fucking seizures and had to be taken to the ER by ambulance. I'm assuming that whatever ecstasy she used had been a bad batch. Remember when she asked to have a drink of my soda? I assume this is when she dropped the pill inside, and it dissolved. She probably crushed it beforehand or something. I have no clue, but at this time in my life, I hadn't done drugs for quite a while, especially not ecstasy. Kay also went on to tell people that I was the one that slipped her the drug, and said that she had to go to the hospital. She's a pathological liar, and has had to go to therapy for a long time for mental disorders. All of this happened because she wanted me to be high like her. I could have committed suicide because I wasn't in the right frame of mind. It still affects me to this day. It sounds cliche, but I have a hard time trusting people with this experience and among other things. I also don't like sharing drinks with friends. I get scared when I go out to a bar or club, fearing for the worst. I mean, if my own friend had done this to me, I'd stop being a stranger, so I always have my guard up, no matter what. So Decay, let's not meet again. You'll need some sort of backstory to understand everything. I'll try to sum that up as briefly as I can. Okay, so I used to grow herb between 2008 and 2010, like a lot of herb up in the mountains. So, after we would harvest, I would come back to town and stay with my brother. He lived on sort of the edge of the bad neighborhood, so that made a great location for customers. Basically, I'd post up at an apartment and drive down to the liquor store to meet people to keep traffic away from my place. The owners of the particular liquor store became very good friends of mine. They are Palestinian and smoked a lot of weed. Eventually got to the point where I would just post up by the door and chill with them, smoking out front, and people would come up and shoot the shit with us. They owned the store and worked it daily, so they kind of knew who was cool and who wasn't. Well, one day, this guy named Mike B, we'll call him, shows up. They told me that he was a decent guy, and so we talked some business. I had a truck that needed some work done, and it just so happened that he had the O-rings I needed. So we made some trades and continued to do business beyond that for about a year. I eventually let him come to my place, and he saw several pounds I had there. That was by mistake. I lined up another transaction which lagged for a while. All still went fine. He wasn't anything to be concerned about, I didn't feel. As time goes by, I notice him changing physically. He becomes a lot thinner, cheekbones protruding, and he seems wired a bit. I cut him out of the situation by telling him I no longer sell. Some months go by, and he calls me on December 17th and says, "Hey, do you happen to have any herb to sell? I have $100 burning a hole in my pocket." I should have just kept my original position and left it alone because last I saw him, he seemed a bit weaker, but it was just before Christmas and I really needed any additional money I could get, so I took the risk. He told me where to meet him, and I happened to have a friend over who had dropped me off. I normally would have driven my truck, but the tags were expired and it was a far walk to my house anyway. So I get dropped off. Standing there in front of the store that's closed, I see Mike B crossing the street towards me a few minutes later. He seemed a little confused and asked me, "Where's your truck?" I told him I was dropped off, and he then kind of went into thought for a moment, then said, "Alright, let's head across the street. I'll get the money there." So this area is sketchy as fuck, and he leads me directly to a very, very dark, sketchy alley behind a townhouse complex. My intuition begins to set in. A little late, you know. I start to recall his words in my mind. I have $100 burning a hole in my pocket. Who the hell has any extra money a week before Christmas? I ask myself. I observed to my left 5 to 6 shady appearing individuals under a carport, drinking maybe. I don't know. I didn't look in their direction long, just enough to see the looks of no fucks given in few of their eyes. I just keep walking and assume they're good people because I'm not one to judge someone by their appearance. So my mind is still going. Intuition is sending me small alarms. What am I doing? Do I need $100 this bad? He leads me to the back gate of an apartment complex that is a short distance further up that alley and stops me there. He is much smaller than me, and if it were one-on-one, I know I could take him, so I'm not too worried about Mike alone. He says, "Wait here. I'll go get the money from my girlfriend and be right back." I said, I'd rather not wait right here. Can we do this inside?" He responded, "She's weird about company, just hang on." And he walks through the gate. I observe him unusually peering through a window. Then he knocks really hard on a door, and then rounds the corner out of my sight. I'm feeling very uncomfortable now. That shit was weird. Why did he just do that? So I meld into the shadows some. A woman comes out, and it seemed like she instantly spotted me. I must have had been glowing white and standing out despite my intentions to meld. She said very sternly, "Fuck around here and get fucked up," and went back inside. I knew something was off. He couldn't have had any ties to that apartment at all. this is some kind of strange setup. I began to dwell on my intuition, and it tells me that he rounded that corner and is now at the front door of the townhouse where the 5 to 6 guys were out back of. My mind plays out the entire scenario vividly. He knocks on the front door, Swan lets him in, and he goes through the townhouse out the back and informs the 5 to 6 guys that the plans have been messed up and they'll need to improvise. They must have not overtaken us in the alley because their initial plan was to have me in the truck, which maybe they also intended on taking. I don't know. Anyways, so I have only 2 options. Do I go through the narrow walkway out through the apartments I'm standing in past the door he knocked on and potentially run into them and others on the street right there? Or do I go back the direction I came and past the exact spot where they were standing the last minutes I saw the group of them a few minutes ago? I have a gut feeling that they are on the street approaching the corner I last saw Mike round when he last vanished. I can almost see their red dots on the mini-map of my mind. I feel them all there, even though I don't see them. So, my intuition tells me to go back through the alley and pass where I last saw them. This time alone. That is the way I felt I needed to go. I follow my guts, and as I pass the carport where they all were, I see none of them are any longer there. So this gets my heart going. Where did they all run off to? Are they behind me? I look back. Darkness. I break into a sprint and get the hell out of there. Once I was far enough away and in the cuts near a store, I texted him, "Mike, what's up?" No response. I text again and again, no answer. I walk home nervously, keeping on a course they wouldn't assume I'd taken if they're following me. I get home and text again. I call and text, nothing. He's hitting forward on my calls on 3 rings. 1 ring, 2 rings, 1 ring. Okay, that's what's up. Now I know for sure what happened. My intuition was dead on. He intended on having me drive him into that alley and those guys were supposed to block us in. He was going to play it as though he didn't know them and they would check me for my weed in my truck. He and I would then be split up, I'm sure, and he'd meet with them somewhere else. He's avoiding my calls and texts for some reason. I knew things were off, and I felt my intuition so strong that night telling me which direction I could find safety, and kept to it. So a few days later, I'm at the store I met him at, telling my Palestinian friends that guy is no good. They're blown away by the story. Later, the store owner asks me if I want to go with him to Jay's house to burn one. I have only met Jay once, but he's an old school biker who lives around the corner. He's a good person to know, and I sensed that when I first met him, so I agreed. I would go along with the store owner buddy to Jay's house. We arrived and had a smoke session at his kitchen table. Buddy turns to me and says, "Jason, Jay knows Mike B too. Tell him your story just like you told me. I know I can trust this guy Jay. He has the most honest eyes I've ever seen. Striking light blue eyes. He looks a lot like Gandalf." So I tell him how it all went down. He then says to me, "I'll tell you something I know for sure about your intuitions. You have them 100% accurate that night. Mike B had my youngest son drive him behind a store about a month ago, where a few guys cornered them and began to beat my son through the window. It's almost the exact same setup, and you not having your truck that night clearly threw everything off from their usual routine. Crazy thing is, I was driving my truck along that very same street where I last saw Mike B as often as I could work it into my routes wherever I was heading, and one day, lo and behold, I spot him walking with a woman. He's about a quarter mile ahead, walking on the sidewalk on my side of the road heading towards me. I had my son with me in the passenger seat, so I couldn't do anything too irresponsible. So as I get closer, I slow it down to about 20 miles per hour. Speed limit is 40 there. I'm slightly veering to the right towards the gutter, towards Mike. At some point he sees me approaching in a way it shouldn't be from the road towards them. So he looks up dead into my eyes. I instantly jerk the wheel to the right towards him harder. He instantly puts his head down and continues walking forward. I veer back into my lane and drive home. I haven't seen Mike B for years until just recently, when I recognized him in front of me at a line at another corner store near the first place we met. I know his name, but I want to see how he plays it. It's been years. His forearm tattoos are unique. It's Mike for sure. I ask, "Hey, is your name Mike?" He turns around, eyes shifty, and says, "Nah, Jeremy." It turns back around. If my intuitions didn't already tell me I was correct, and Jay hadn't validated my intuitions, the way Mike instantly looked down again after after making eye contact with me when I was swerving at him in the truck was all the evidence I needed to be sure he was looking to jack me. His actions in the store just cemented my beliefs. I'll always follow my intuitions. They never lead me astray. So when I was young, I went to that one house in town where the residents went all out and probably spent thousands of dollars getting the place perfect for Halloween. Now, this place was really insanely well done, and I mean really freaking good. Albeit, even as an adult, it competed with professional haunted houses. I believe the year was either 1999 or 2000, because I went as Darth Maul. I remember being literally scared out of my mind the previous few years, and I hoped the badassery my character would provide me with some sort of courage. They blocked off the scene with a black tarp and had everything you could ever want to see in such house. A psycho shower killing scene with a zombie crawling out of a toilet, ghouls and demons climbing the tree, blood, gore, strobes, fog, everything. I remember feeling terrified even with my double lightsaber. Even though I was scared to death to walk through it, I always admired the workmanship, as I knew that the props they had done were either really expensive or took some good effort to make. To this day, I haven't never seen anyone who had as horrible as a yard as they did. As always every year, I saw the house owners sitting on their porch reveling in the terror they brought to the neighborhood and handing out candy. So as I nervously crossed the yard past flying banshees and impaled corpses, I noticed the main attraction at the end of the line. There, on what I guess was probably the driveway, was the bottomless pit attraction. The illusion bewildered and chilled me, and I thought it was only lit by the lone light bulb there. It was a box glow like a burning furnace. I must have stared at it for a while when suddenly I heard a cough in a low hushed voice at my right. I don't really remember what was said, but I want to say it sounded like something like, "Hey, check this out," or "Hey, I want to show you something," in a dark, rough, hoarse tone. I looked over and at first saw nothing but the wide gate to what was clearly the side of the owner's house. There was just a faint amount of light from the glowing pit to illuminate the outlines of the gated fence. After adjusting my eyes, I noticed a figure standing completely still. In fact, it was so still, I remember thinking it was just another static prop. My young mind just didn't register a lot of this and was still looking for the voice I heard, not realizing it had come from the figure, I, who could still only barely make out. After a few moments, I heard the voice again. I realized it came from the figure and began to approach it. It was obviously a stupid idea in comparison to everything else that was happening around me. This figure seemed anything but imposing, so I cautiously approached the figure, trying to make sense of it. Suddenly the figure began to move, and I froze solid. The light from the amber glow lit up its face just enough for me to make out its features. This I remember clearly. It was a scraggly and rough-looking man with a coarse, gray beard and yellow teeth. His weathered and tattered clothing looked like he hasn't been changed in ages. He was smiling at me, though I had no idea why, but it settled me great under the hellish glow of the light bulb behind me. It felt wrong. It was as if at that moment I had acquired some clarity and realized his presence here was obviously not part of the show. And considering I already saw the owners clearly did not belong on this property, I screamed and ran out of there as fast as I could to the exit, not looking behind for a second. I probably got a few kids to look at me, but as I found my parents waiting outside, I told them the man I saw. I saw one of the owners approach and ask if everything was alright. I said something like, "I don't like the old man by the gate." He looked at me for a second and went, "What man?" I never went there again. Let's not meet creepy shadow man. For some background, we were all mid-20s girls from the Midwest. The first of my friends was getting married, so naturally, a bunch of us went to Las Vegas for a bachelorette party. Having never been to Vegas before, we were having a blast. This story begins on our last night out. We were at this pool party this day, and one of the girls, Brittany, got completely plastered, so she had to be taken home and put to bed. So we didn't make it out that night. We actually had 2 rooms on 2 different floors. One was on like the 16th floor and the other was on the 6th. She stayed in the room on the 6th floor. There was a DJ playing a show in our hotel that night, and it was decided that we will go there for convenience. The maid of honor was one of those people that knew everyone one way or another, and an old friend was a promoter for this club. He was able to not only get us in for free, but to get a table with free bottle service. We thought this was the most amazing thing ever and took huge advantage of the free drinks. As many of you know, Vegas is very expensive. One of the girls, Danielle, and I go to the bathroom, and by the time we make it back to the table, our party has disappeared. Bouncer dropped us like a hot potato and told us, "This isn't your table anymore, someone bought it." We were pretty bummed because not only did we have to go to the general peasant area, but now we were all split up. Everyone was drunk and not really responding to text, and it was too loud to call. Hoping that the rest of the girls were together, me and Danielle stayed and enjoyed the concert until around 2 a.m. before walking back to our rooms. She was staying in the 6th floor, and I was on the 16th. We split up on the elevator to go to our separate rooms, but mine was already occupied by 4 of the girls, all passed out. I called Danielle and told her I was coming down, but she warned me that Megan was in the room crying hysterically and she's not sure what happened. As I get down to that room, we learned the truth. Still one of the scariest things to ever happen to someone I know. As told by Megan, I was enjoying the concert until I got split up from everyone. I decided to walk back to the room as I was very tired. I got on the elevator with several people and I was the only one that got off of my floor, or so I thought. I walked to the end of the hallway and as I put my key card to the door, a man comes sprinting down the hall and tackles me into the room. The door shuts behind us. He climbed on top of me and punched me in the face several times before trying to knock me out. All of a sudden, Brittany, who was asleep in the room, wakes up out of nowhere and yells, "What the fuck?" She gets up and starts kicking the man. He thought Megan was alone, so naturally he freaked out and ran out the room. Her blood was all over the wall when I got to the room. Hotel security came and said something that gave me the chills. We were able to watch him on our cameras follow you the whole way through the casino and onto the elevator. He got out pretending to go the opposite direction just until you opened the room door. Then he charged. The whole time you were walking, he was just behind you, watching you like a hawk. It definitely seemed like he knew what he was doing. Thank God for my other friend not making it out that night, because Megan truly could have been alone and trapped in the hotel room with that guy. Also, the police never did find him. Hi Reddit. I really didn't want to give you guys the usual speech of how I'm a long-time lurker but first-time poster, but unfortunately, it's the truth. I originally posted this a couple of days ago on a throwaway account because they don't let you use accounts you don't have any activity on anymore because it could be a spam. So, I'm posting this on a friend's old account because I joined Reddit like a month ago and don't want to post on my normal account as I have told so many people this story. Anyway, enjoy the story. Sorry for the grammar errors or mistakes. A bit of backstory. My mom was a single mom and I was her only child. Me and her were super close all of my life and we used to live in a pretty dingy apartment in the middle of nowhere. At the time, she was a nurse at a nearby hospital and would work night shifts, so anytime there wasn't a babysitter, she would just let me stay with my aunt and cousin, Lily. She was never cool with leaving me in the apartment alone. Eventually, my mom started dating Todd, and eventually, they got married. So I went from living in this pretty horrible part of town in this old rundown apartment to this gorgeous suburban house with a pool and a huge backyard and a safe community where everybody knew everybody. I also gained 2 stepsisters near my age. One was 13, the other was 17. I have to say, I was living a life. However, I really wanted to stay in the school I was already in, as that was where all my friends were, and I felt really happy. So my mom decided it was best that I stay there. Todd was a music teacher in a different high school nearby. His daughters went there too. This story took place during the start of summer in 2010. I was 15 and I just got in my summer vacation. At this point, my mom had worked her way up to working daytime hours, which were usually more favorable. My school got summer vacation a week or 2 before Todd in the girls' school. Not sure why, but this meant I usually had the house to myself. The only thing was my mom still wasn't cool with me being alone. even though the neighborhood was a lot safer and nothing went unnoticed. You never know what things might happen. That day, I invited my cousin, Lily, over for a pool party. She was a year older, but went to my high school, so we were both on vacation. The day went normal. Lily was dropped off by my aunt in the morning before Mom and Todd went to work, and we lay under the sun for most of the day. Eventually, we got kind of sick of being in the heat, so we retreated inside. The way the house is laid out is the usual suburban home layout, except Todd had a built-in sunroom with large windows on the side of the house. The sunroom had a glass door to the pool, and on the opposite wall, a glass door to the patio to the side of my house. Shrubbery and a large bush covered the sunroom from being seen in the front door. However, you could clearly see who was at the front door if you were inside the sunroom. If you guys want a diagram, I will draw one. It probably sounds super confusing. Lily and I sat in the sunroom for a while, talking, when a car pulls up into the driveway. I sit up to see who's in the front seat, but the sun is glaring off the window of the car. Perfect. Anxiety sets in from my mom's continuous nagging about stranger danger, and I immediately grab my phone. Lily tells me to calm down, and that's just probably someone on the phone who pulled in because they didn't see anyone was home. I begin to calm down. Then the man opens the door of the car, scans the front yard, and knocks on the front door. He was late 40s, early 50s, golden hair with a large bald patch in the middle, and a beard. It doesn't sound creepy, but something about his demeanor told me that he wasn't here for a good reason. My heart was pounding. Lily gets up to answer it when I stop her and tell her it's probably not a good idea. As soon as I say that, he walks away, but not towards his car, the opposite direction. I calm down as I think he is walking to my neighbor's, but then I realize he is coming in the side gate and most certainly see me and Lily through the glass windows, and before I even have the chance to process this thought, he comes out of the corner. His eyes meets mine. He gives me this menacing smile, speed walks towards us and begins to knock on the glass door. I don't even know how, but adrenaline caused me to jump up from my sofa and open the door. Fine day today, isn't it? He says immediately. I instantly feel the creepy vibes from this guy as he looks me up and down in my swimsuit. Yeah, who are you? I reply. Then he says, were you girlies out swimming in the pool? I immediately shoot a worried look back at Lily, and she gives me the same one back. We both realize we have a creeper on our hands. Were you? He repeats. Can I get a reason why you're here? I say. Then he says, I'm just here to clean your pool. Someone in your house booked me to do it last week. I could tell he was lying. It's like he thought, swimsuit, pool boy. As terrified as I was, I could still figure out he was lying through his teeth. Also, he didn't say who. Surely, he could give me a name. This dialogue of me asking him questions about the booking and him giving very vague responses goes on for a good minute. I know the pool boy. He lives a few houses down. He was like 20, not about 50, and he just did it and left a bill in the mailbox. No knocking, no talking, and definitely no creeping. He takes a step closer. Can I come in? Why would a pool boy want to come into the house? My face goes pale. I see he slowly gets closer, almost as if he was ready to pounce. I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong house. I slam the door, turn the lock, grab my phone, and we run out of my room, with Lily sprinting out too. We hide in my closet, and I hear him shouting at us to let him in. We can hear him trying to open the door on the pool side and on the patio. I call my mom, sobbing, knowing she gets off work in an hour, and tell her what's going on. However, my mom being my mom, the nervous wreck she is, bombed it out of work and got home in 25 minutes. Her work was an hour away. When she got back, she found us curled up in my closet, sobbing. She went to our neighbor's house, and apparently the guy had been around the whole neighborhood trying to gain access to houses. If there was kids, they'd say someone in the household had called asking to clean their pool. If they were adults, he would ask if they had a booking. They'd say no, and he said he got the wrong house. It was so scary. I had never experienced fear like that before. It was reported to the police, but of course, nothing ever came of it. To this day, however, I really don't think he was trying to burgle some houses. That sinister look he gave me never sat right with me. I live in a different state now and only come home for family events. Whenever I'm home, if I'm left in the house alone, I can't bring myself to stay in the sunroom. I feel really unsafe, like someone's watching me. So creepy fake pool boy, let's not meet. P.S. Thanks for scarring me for life. He stalked me across 2 different countries, so this is going to be a pretty long one. Several years ago, I was using a dating app. It was all fun and games. Sometimes I met up with people for hookups, sometimes I didn't. And most of the time, I didn't even reply to those who only sent certain types of pictures unsolicited. One day, this guy shot me a message on there. He was 4 years younger than me, meaning he was 18 at the time and I was 22. I didn't really consider him my type, but at the same time, I also didn't think it would hurt to get to know him. I mean, looks are just looks, and there has been plenty of times where I fell for a guy not for looks, but for the way he acted and his personality. So maybe that could have been the case too. I just came out of a pretty toxic relationship that involves lots of cheating and trust issues and insecurities, so I wasn't really looking for a new relationship, but it did feel good to get positive attention from guys. We started texting back and forth, nothing out of the ordinary, but I realized pretty soon that the part of his personality he let me experience was a lot more than just, I'm horny, let's fuck. And look, no slut shaming, because I wasn't that opposed to it. As I said, I just had a nasty breakup and was looking for some fun. He asked me on a date and I said yes. We exchanged numbers, agreed on a date, time, and place, and then we went back to our normal lives for now. I had a lot going on at the time. It was only a few months until I had moved to a different place, so I already started planning for all that. And not just that, but a friend of mine invited me to come with him on a trip to Amsterdam, which obviously had to be prepared as well, since the trip was scheduled 2 weeks before I was supposed to move. Therefore, it comes to no one's surprise that I kind of forget about the guy until the day we were supposed to meet up. He texted me a few hours earlier if we were still clear. After I scolded myself for forgetting, I told him that we were meeting as planned, even though that would throw my schedule off a little. So I got ready for the date, and I kid you not even an hour before we were supposed to meet, he canceled. I mean, not too big of a deal. It happens that he can't make it. So we schedule another day, which he proceeded to cancel as well. Cancellation after cancellation, week after week, 7 different dates. Each time it allegedly was a sick relative or pet, so clearly, I took that he didn't really want to meet me anymore, which would be fine. I'm not everyone's type either, but he could have at least had the decency not to lead me on then. So I told him off about his shitty behavior and blocked him. Maybe that was a little bit of an overreaction, but I just didn't want to waste my time with a guy that seemingly always found excuses to meet me, when I could focus on either the moving process or the vacation process, or with another guy who has actual interest. But then, he messaged me on the dating app. How dare I block him? He wanted to meet me, but I was just an unappreciative bitch. Obviously, after that I blocked him on the app as well. I thought that I had heard the last of him, so I went on with my days. It was going to be a good summer. I already started forgetting him after a few weeks. And then another account messaged me, fake pictures and all, but it didn't take long for me to figure out it was him. He basically admitted it in the first place. So, another blocked account, another block, day after day. I thought, what was even going on? He didn't want to meet me first, and now he creates new accounts on the daily to contact me. What the hell? So I just had enough and wanted to tell him off again. When he started to apologize for his behavior, that he was in the wrong and that he was still willing to meet me if I was willing to meet him still. Trust me, I really wanted to hook up, but in my mind, if I just met him and be just very bad at sex or something, he'd just never contact me again or something. Stupid, but hey, it was worth a try. So we scheduled a meeting before I was supposed to leave for the trip to Amsterdam, which I stupidly told him about, and since I didn't have a car, he offered to come to my place. Now, I would never ever give a stranger from the internet my address, but back then, I did. I mean, he couldn't possibly be a creep, right? So we met, he came into my house, we sat down on my bed, exchanged basic pleasantries, and then he stopped talking altogether. He didn't even look at me. Just to be safe, I wasn't a catfish. I looked exactly like I did in all my photos, and neither was he. Only when I asked him something, he would reply with very few words, until I asked him directly about if we'd hook up or not. Then he suddenly started kissing, and, well, I don't have to go into detail. So, when he finished, he sat next to me staring at the wall, not saying a word. At that point, I was pretty annoyed. I mean, I get being shy and all, but if it's that intense, how would you muster the courage to go out on a hookup? Anyways, after I went to the bathroom to freshen up, I told him my roommates would be back soon, so we jumped up, said goodbye, and just left. I got no other message from him after that. Fast forward to my trip to Amsterdam, my friend, let's call him Joe, had lots of fun roaming through the streets of Amsterdam day and night, relax on a pretty hotel, and do the usual shit tourists do. One day, we were just walking down a very busy road very close to the main train station, when suddenly I hear a car honk loudly next to us. The traffic light was red, so the person wasn't driving. I thought nothing of it and didn't even look until the guy started to call my name. The voice was very familiar, and the voice that belonged to it was still in my memory. It was my hookup guy. When I looked, he smiled widely and called for me to come over, but when he saw Joe, who at this point asked me who that was, his smile faded. I was dumbstruck, so I didn't say anything, but that wasn't necessary. The traffic light just turned green. People started getting pissed that my hookup didn't immediately go. So finally he focused on the road again and drove off. That was a hell of a coincidence, right? That he would be in Amsterdam the same time as me? But why wouldn't he say so when I told him my plans? If he didn't want me to know, why call out to me in the middle of a busy road? I didn't allow my mind to think about him intentionally going there to find me. That was impossible. He wasn't interested in me anyway, right? Back at home, my phone started to blow up. Calls, angry texts, new profiles. Didn't matter what I told him. Didn't matter that I threatened to block him again. He told me that I was a slut for going out with another guy, despite being in a relationship with him. That I was just like everyone else. That he deserved better than me. And then he said he had just been coming to Amsterdam for me, to surprise me. When I tell you I changed my number and deleted the dating app quicker than I possibly could have, I mean I sprinted to my car and drove to the closest shop to get a new number. Not long after, I moved into the new place. I had 2 new roommates that were both in the same college course as I was in. We got along fine, and the house is pretty big. One of my roommates inherited it from her mom. The moving went smoothly. I didn't get another text, and I didn't get any messages on my social media. And he didn't show up to my old place. Eventually, a few months later, I basically forgot again. For more context, the new house was in a village, not a small town, but a village. There were no shops, no nothing. Shopping we'd have to do in the next town that was approximately 4 miles away. My room was on the ground floor. The window of that room was right next to the entrance door when you were looking at the house from the outside. And right beside my room outside was the carport. The ground was covered in gravel, and once anybody moved, the light of the carport would turn on. It was a pretty hot summer, so I sometimes slept with my window open. I wasn't that afraid because, once again, it was a very small village, and barely anybody would drive through here. So one night, I was just sleeping, even had my back turned towards the window, and then I started to hear someone walking on the gravel towards my window. I immediately turned around, and, of course, I saw a guy walking past my window. Though, he didn't look inside. He walked to the mailbox and seemed to throw something inside, then he left again. I was stunned for a few seconds, but at least it wasn't a murderer, I thought. So as soon as I could move, I closed the window and kept it closed each night from that point onward. This actually happened a few nights, that someone would walk to our mailbox in the middle of the night, but nothing was ever inside, at least that I knew of. It was weird, but maybe one of my roommates were receiving something personal that they just didn't want to share. Cut to a few nights later, I was minding my own business when I suddenly heard some gravel again. My roommates had just gone to bed half an hour ago, and I didn't hear anyone leave, so I thought it was just the mailbox guy. But this time, he didn't walk to the mailbox. He just walked to the carport. I know that because the light turned on. Immediately, I texted my roommates about the guy on our carport. One of my roommates, Sarah, who had her room across the hallway from mine, while Mary, the other roommate, had hers upstairs, texted back into our group chat we had made. She told me that we should meet with weapons at the bottom of the stairs to investigate. I grabbed a scissor I had in my room and went to our meeting point. Turns out my weapons were the most useful, since Mary came downstairs with a ukulele, and Sarah thought an empty plastic bottle could be used as a weapon. After laughing at the absurdity of our weapons, we started getting back in serious mode, going to the side door that led to the carport. Sarah looked through the window of the said door, but didn't see anyone. The light was turned off too. Just in that moment, we heard someone tampering with our mailbox again. Not gonna lie, I probably pissed my pants a little bit. Immediately, we ran to the front door, opened it, and looked outside. But there was no one, at least not that we could see. After a look in the mailbox, which was empty of course, we went back inside. Not even 2 minutes later, I got a text from an unknown number saying how cute I looked in my nightgown, that no makeup even made me look prettier. He hoped that I'd come out alone so we could have some more fun together like before I moved, but he was sad to find out 2 other people were with me. Needless to say that none of us slept that night. The police was called immediately and did a sweep, but no one was found on the property. He didn't exactly say it, but I know it was that guy. So I filed a report the next day. Nothing really happened with it, but since nothing else happened like that, I thought that he got the message when we called the police. Sometimes I still get messages from an unknown number, but they're pretty harmless and don't really bother any further when I ignore them. But the fear in the back of my mind that one day he could come back stays, of course. In the meantime, I took up self-defense classes, so dear stalker, we better never meet again. This is my first post here. This experience still gives me chills to this day. I actually have a few other camp encounters that I can share if anyone is interested, mainly occurring along the AT with campers. North GA is a mighty interesting place. A few years ago, I worked at a Jewish summer camp in North Georgia. As many of you might know, Georgia is a fairly conservative state as well as being predominantly Christian. There are small Jewish communities and a few summer camps. I'd say this camp is more culturally Jewish than it was religious. There were no religious requirements nor religion-specific focus. Rather, it was a place for kids who were often in the minority to come to a camp that allowed them to meet some other kids like them. Staff came from all over. We had many Australians, lots of Brits, and a few Israels, and people from various areas of the USA. Each night at around 10, most of the staff were able to go out of town for a couple of hours. Enough staff remained behind to watch over the cabins we rotated. This particular night, a group of about 5 of us decided to go to a local bar and grab a few beers. It had been a hot day and was a humid night, so we decided to sit outside on a patio. For some backstory on the town, generally, we were extremely well received by the community, despite differences. We brought in lots of revenue for the town during the summer. We bought supplies at a local Walmart and often took the campers on tubing trips or occasionally out to dinner after a long hike on the Appalachian Trail. It was midsummer, so we'd been out to all the bars in the area many times already that season. The 5 of us sat down around a table, drinking and discussing the events of the day, as fellow employees would after work. About 30 minutes in, a white man in his 20s came up to our table. I distinctly remember a jagged scar on his cheek, but didn't think much of it at the time. He introduced himself, then told us that he was having a party that night at his place. Anyone can come, he said. Black, white, gay, straight. I found it odd that he'd open his speech with that disclaimer. Of course, the party should be open to everyone. Why did he feel the need to specify? But we all had a few beers and were feeling pretty loose. We talked for a bit longer, and nothing really seemed off. We told him we were working at a camp in the area and couldn't stay out, so we'd probably be heading back soon. An hour later, our group went back to the parking lot to get into the car. As we approached it, we saw the same guy come out of the shadows. He had a buddy with him with a shaved head. His expression was incredibly hateful. His eyes had changed. He pounded his fist into his hands and then took off his shirt to reveal a poorly inked SS tattoo. My stomach dropped. One of the bigger guys in my group, Kevin, immediately reacted by pulling a knife out of his back pocket. At summer camp, most of us carried knives. We spent a lot of time building campfires, etc. and Kevin asked what they wanted. The original guy started shouting some anti-Semitic remarks and told us he was going to, quote, beat us down. Kevin started walking toward the two guys, but we pulled him back. He told us his buddies were on the way. Sure enough, more guys started walking into the parking lot. It's all kind of a blur here. I remember jumping onto one of the cars, pulling Kevin with us. It felt like we were surrounded, though there were probably only 7 or 8 of them. Rocks were thrown at the car. We sped off. My heart was beating like crazy. We never went back to that bar. On the bright side, when we told the story to the competing bar in town, the bartender lined up 6 shots, cheered us, and said we'd always be welcome in his bar and that town. We had no more problems in that town itself, but when I took some campers on a 2-day hike in the Appalachian Trail, it was a whole nother story. That's for another time. I went on a Tinder date some time ago while I was adjusting to a new city I'd moved to. I didn't really know anybody there, so I used some online dating apps to see the dating scene around town. I landed one from a girl that seemed just like an artsy hippie girl type. We had a few exchanges through the Tinder app and decided to meet up for a drink. I picked her up at her house and she greeted me at the door and gave me a hug. She said the name of a local bar she wanted to go to for us to chat and get to know each other. I told her I would drive and proceeded to my car. The first red flag I noticed was when I walked to my car and opened the door, she just followed me to the driver's side and started standing behind me staring. I looked at her blankly for about 15 seconds and asked her if she was going to get in. She said, "Sure, I'd love to," and went the long way to the passenger side around the back of the car. Since I had just met the girl, I figured she had maybe smoked some weed or something, as I got that kind of vibe she was just a bit of a stoner. As I was driving to the bar, she talked in a very low voice, almost as if she was trying to whisper. I'm not hard of hearing or anything, but I had to ask her to repeat herself several times just so I could make out full sentences of what she was trying to say. When we got to the bar, I made sure we got a seat closer to the back, away from most people, just so I could have a little quiet in order to hear her. The conversation honestly carried on normal from this point, and it was actually a fun time for the beginning. We talked about different things we were interested in, and she did bring up that she does use weed and a few other tripping substances, like shrooms and such. I'm not much of a fan of these, but at least made me relax in the back of my mind to think maybe she was just high off marijuana, and that rationally explained some of that out there behavior that was going on. Granted, I had a few drinks at this point, so I was honestly not thinking straight. I asked if she wanted to go to my place after drinks, and she agreed. We went and got to my place, and a few more drinks happened, and then she started talking about her jewelry. She told me her jewelry was her big secret and it defined her. When I asked her why it was so important, she said, "I'm actually Anastasia and I was never killed in Russia. My jewelry is my link to my past." It was hard for me to take that serious at this point with how much I had drank, so I kinda challenged that statement using the little bit I knew about history. At this point, she freaked out and started yelling at the top of her lungs that I didn't respect ancestors and history. Then got quiet and tiptoed right up to me and grabbed me by the neck. She then brought my face eye to eye with hers while still holding my neck. She says at this point, "I'm a shaman and I curse you. My ancestors have destroyed many people and you do not respect that. You are from oppressive ancestors and they will be punished." Then she put her hand on a whiskey glass and made a cross on my face and kissed my forehead. At this point, I started to sober up a little. I talked her into calming down and telling her I was only joking. Then she slowly started going back to normal. Then she started talking about her cat fetish. She tells me she has a list of people who she tames to act as cats. I am not about judging people and their fetishes, so I listen in. She then tells me all the things she does to them and starts acting like a cat in my living room. If she had not yelled at me earlier, I might have almost been turned on by it. My red flags in my head were tingling like crazy at this point, so I just listened and tried not to set her off. She noticed sage on my kitchen counter and asked me to let her light it and bless the house. Side note, I use the sage to make my house smell better occasionally. It's kind of a ritual I like to do, but it's mine and mine only. Something I take very personally and like to do myself. I tell her no, she can't light it, and that's my thing to do on my own. Then she freaks out, telling me I'm a horrible human being and screaming all over the place. I tell her I can take her home now, and she runs to the door and goes outside. As I get outside, she's screaming at the top of her lungs that I'm a horrible person and that I should go die. I tell her she can walk herself home then, and I go back to my place and lock the door. She then starts banging on the door hard about 10 minutes later, saying she left her phone in there. I grab her phone off the kitchen counter and open the door and hand it to her. She tries to barge inside, and I block her with my forearm. She then acts like she's about to punch me. I just hold my ground and tell her she's not coming in. She screams she wanted the whiskey bottle we were drinking from. I told her hell no, because I paid for the damn thing. I slammed the door at that point and locked it. I heard her bang on the door for a minute. I then heard her footsteps going down the stairs. I waited for about an hour and then went walking outside to see if she was still hanging around. I didn't see her, nor did I ever see her again after that. I know this is probably not the scariest encounter ever, but for the next few nights, I was totally creeped out, always walking around the area I live to make sure she wasn't hanging around. I honestly hope she's okay, wherever she is, but I'd hope to never see her again. So some context. I've never really been in a long-term relationship. I've dated a girl a bit, but I haven't dated a guy. I'm bi, and I've never slept with either a girl or guy. The story, like anyone else, I was age 20 female. I was swiping on Tinder to try to put myself out there. I like to think I'm not naive and pretty intuitive about people, but I wasn't quite so much about this guy at all. Jake and I swiped and matched each other 2 days ago. Jake first messages me telling me he wanted to meet me and my dog, and he thought we were both cute. The night was the first time the first red flag was raised. When I didn't answer him back immediately, he messaged me asking if he was detecting negativity, chalking it up to nervousness. I apologized and explained why I didn't answer, and all was good. We then planned to meet up at a bar. Flag number 2 was waved when I arrived at the bar. It's important to note, in the state I live in, any place selling liquor can't let someone under 21 in. I didn't know this, and had been assured by Jake that I could get in no problem. Of course this wasn't true. Luckily, in retrospect unfortunately, seeing my birthday was in a week, the bouncer let me in anyway. Within minutes, Jake was at the bar too. Meeting this guy, he seemed normal. Red leather jacket, chucks, typical normal dude. He ordered me a gin and tonic and one for himself. We settled in to talk. He tells me about his life. He is rich and his family, and I do the same. We play pool at one point, so I put my drink down. This is when things got a little blurry. I can't remember most of our conversations up until we happened to getting back to my place. I remember us leaving, us getting in the car, and us getting back near my place. You have to understand that I don't drink much, but one drink does not get me drunk. I don't get hangovers, I barely even brown out, and I never black out. This is important to note. Once in my town, we decided to go to a nearby market to pick up food. As we are there, red flag 3 occurs. Seeing someone I thought I knew, I told Jake I was going to go say hi. He awkwardly backed away and stood outside at this point, refusing to meet her. I was wrong though, I didn't know the girl, and soon rejoined him to walk to my place. As we open the door to my place, my roommate Maddie opens the door. We say hi, talk a little, and she mentions she's about to take a shower. Jake at this point creepily makes a "oh" sound. Maddie, who is also tipsy at this point, mentions some guy she wants to have sex with. No biggie, it's the way she rolls. But after his expression and the realization of how tired I was and how drunk, I say he should go. He does with no attempt of any physical contact. This is where the story should have ended, but it doesn't. Within minutes, this dude blows up my phone with messages, saying he is more open-minded like my roommate, calling me boring, implying that I am not attracted to guys, and saying that he felt no chemistry, and he hoped we would have cuddled. I show my roommate, who gasps. Me not getting the full meaning of the open-minded comment, remember, drunk, asks why she's so shocked. Finally, I get it. He's implying he wants to sleep with her, that he is more open to sex than I am. Creepy, just so creepy. At this point, I'm freaking out. Slowly, I realize how I'm acting and feeling, putting together how one drink shouldn't make me feel this way. I realize I might have been drugged. Maddie and I go to a local police station. We report it. I decide to get tested. I could explain why, but until you're in my position, possibly drugged at 3 a.m., embarrassed, worried you're wrong, worried you might be charged for underage drinking, don't judge. It's a lot harder than it looks to go through the whole process. Anyway, the story ends like this. He's blocked, I'm terrified because he knows where I live, and me slipping off whatever's in my body. Jack from Tender, let's not meet again, and please stop drugging girls. Also stop creeping on people's roommates. It's fucking gross. Sorry, this is a lot longer than I intended. So, about 4 years ago, I was doing a year abroad in Switzerland as part of my degree. Just before leaving, my boyfriend and I ended our relationship, as he was off to America, and myself to Switzerland. Anyway, I was quite bummed at first, and then decided it'd be fun to download Tinder, and just piss about and date meaninglessly, as I wasn't going to be there for quite long, just for an academic year. So, I went on quite a few dates. Some were god-awful, and some were pretty decent people. I was in Geneva, so there were people from everywhere basically. A few months in, I matched with a French guy, and we were chatting for a while. My French and his English were more or less the same level, so there were a few mild miscommunications, but nothing too big. I was 20 at the time, and had my age preference set to something like 20 to 27. So I've been chatting with this French guy, I'll call him Pierre, for a couple of weeks now, and he seems quite cool. He's 27, so fair bit older, and he's a science secondary school teacher at an all-girls school. Remember this, as it makes it even weirder. So we went for a drink, and he buys us quite a few rounds, which is great, because it's Switzerland, and I'm a poor student. By the end of the night, I'm pretty drunk, and I remember making out with him, and then getting dropped back to my student homes by Pierre. He had been drinking soft drinks after the first. Anyway, I see him a couple of other times after this, and he's always pushing the alcohol when we're together. One evening, I slept over as it was too late for me to get back, and I wake up in the morning, and he'd taken my bra off while I was asleep. He was wide awake, rubbing my back and staring at me. I hadn't slept with him yet. Making out was the furthest we had ever gone. Then he told me his mom was coming to visit, and did I want to meet her? I only met this guy like 3 times, and I decided I was done with this weirdo. So when I left, I was planning on what to say to get rid of him. Anyway, back home later, I got a text that said something in broke English like, "We slept beautifully," with a smiley face, and I just left it unread. Later that evening, I got a call from him, but I just let it go to voicemail. When I listened to it, he sounded really upset and said that he had to confess something to me because he was falling in love with me and needed to be honest. He revealed that he lied about his age. This reminded me of that episode in Friends where Monica accidentally sleeps with a high school student, thinking he's in his 20s. This guy looks quite young, so I thought he lied and he was younger than 27, but he's actually 35. I know that's not particularly old, but to date a 20-year-old knowing she thinks you're young, I find it weird. I blocked him on Facebook and on my phone, and just sort of got on with the last week of term. He turned up at the reception desk one day having known where I lived, because he dropped me off that one time. The receptionist asked him to leave, and informed me he got quite insistent, so he warned me. I didn't hear from him again after this, which was good, and I was flying back to the UK in a week for the Christmas holidays. During the holidays, I got a random Facebook friend request from a pretty legitimate looking profile, so I accepted it just in case I knew them. Bad idea. I get a huge great essay from Pure saying, "I had tracked your flight all the way back home to check on you to see if you got home okay." Okay, creep. I blocked this other profile and got a message request from another profile about a week later saying he had checked flights from Bristol to Geneva online and decided that I would have chosen the cheaper one closer to term, so he will meet me and we can chat. Now, I don't know if he just turned up to the airport every time a flight from Bristol came in. There were about 2 to 3 a day, but yeah, when I land, and I didn't think he'd be there because who would be able to guess the exact flight I was on? The minute I come through the gates, I see him holding a sign with my name on it and some flowers. Luckily, he was distracted at the time, so I managed to slip by and get on the train into the city. My friend was already back, so I told her to meet me, and then we went to the police because this guy was fucking weird. Didn't have any trouble with him after this, as he probably found someone else to obsess over. But again, he's a teacher to girls 11 to 18. So gross. Anyway, let's not meet again, Pierre, and I hope you're not hanging around the airport still. So this just happened today. Against my better judgment, at the beginning of the month, I got Tinder. I matched a few guys, etc. One of them was James. We ended up texting each other and he seemed pretty chill and pretty into me. He's a decent looking guy and we seemed to click. He had apparently been in a relatively abusive relationship with a woman and he was looking to start over. According to him, she had hit him with a frying pan and pepper sprayed him once. He kept going on about how crazy she was. Alright, it happens. We went out to the movies this past Friday and had a great time. We ended up talking for a few hours and we hit it off pretty well. I asked about the ex because I was just a bit curious as to why he'd stay with someone like that. He didn't say anything positive about her, just that she was crazy, had mental illnesses, and didn't take her meds, that kind of stuff. She had tried to baby trap him, but she had a miscarriage. He expressed relief that he didn't end up with the kid. He said he had felt obligated to her. Again, I get that. In all, I had a good time. This morning rolls around and he tells me that he had hooked up with his ex last night and that he was gonna try work things out with her. I was mildly insulted that I lost out to an abusive chick, but it's whatever. I tell him it's cool. He then, a few hours later, texted me to say that she was crazy and he thought she was changing, but she wasn't, blah blah blah. He kept asking if he could meet me. He was being very pushy about wanting to see me today. He begged for 5 minutes of my time so he could explain to me. I politely explained to him that I didn't want to be involved with someone who was so clearly hung up on his ex. This is where it got nuts. He admitted he still was, but that he wanted to see me today so I could meet her and she could determine if I was better for him than she was, and she wanted him to be happy because he and I had a connection. I flipped after that. I told him the fact that he needed his ex to determine who was right for him was absolutely nuts, and that's not what love is, and that I wanted no part of it. His ex started texting me after that, and it was non-stop insults and incoherent shit that made no sense. She also dropped the bomb that she was his wife. I told her to fuck off basically and blocked the number. I went on Tinder to message him where I called him a piece of shit and said if he ever was intelligent, he should leave her and never message me again. He started to harass me saying that I was miserable because they had a beautiful love together and all this crazy shit. He then went on to say, "My wife knows where you work. I hope she doesn't do anything rash." And I told him that was a threat and I would gladly go to the police if he keeps harassing me. He then said that she's been to jail before, she's not afraid, and that she loves him so much she'd fuck anyone up and risk jail time for him. That she'd kill my friends if they tried to protect me. That she's armed and dangerous. I told him goodbye, reported him, and deleted my Tinder account. I did go to the police tonight, but since it wasn't a direct threat, they can't do too much. The cop thinks that James was more or less full of shit and just trying to scare me, since some people love getting off on that shit. He said that I did the right thing by blocking him and reporting him, and said I should just keep my eyes open and alert the people at my job. Scary thing is, James seemed perfectly normal, but he lied to me about being married, how he felt towards his wife, and he flipped like a switch. His excuse for not being upfront about being married was that they were going to get a divorce. He seemed so docile and unassuming, and the hatred and aggressive attitude was insane. I have to honestly wonder what would have happened had I gone to talk for 5 minutes or whatever the hell he asked me to do. I'm kind of concerned since they do know where I work, but if either of them try anything, then the cops can actually nail them. What a weekend. Okay, so I met a guy on Tinder and we talked for a bit and exchanged Facebooks. A couple of days after chatting, we met up in a public place near my house. He seemed okay, cute, not too weird, and into the same sort of things as me. However, as the day went on, it became clear to me, and I assumed him, that we were better off just as friends. At the end of the date, he walked me part of the way to my house, not to my door, as I didn't exactly want him to know where I lived, and we parted ways. We didn't really talk much after that, just a couple of conversations here and there and stuff. But anyways, a week or so later I was chilling at home, chatting to a friend on the phone while my mom was asleep. I get a Facebook message from the guy. Hey, you, I've left a gift for you outside your door. At that point, I was freaking the fuck out. It was like 2 a.m. and he walked all the way to my house. He told me he didn't drive and he lived a couple of villages away. I was genuinely terrified for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I had no idea how he got to my house or knew my address. Maybe it was on one of my messages. I know back then it would attach where he sent the messages from, but anyway, it was creepy as fuck regardless. Secondly, I didn't know if he was still out there waiting for me. I couldn't see shit out my window because the streetlights turn off at midnight. So still on the phone to my friend, I went to the stairs and checked. He wasn't still outside. I was too freaked out to open the door, so I went back upstairs and eventually got to sleep. It wasn't easy to, believe me. The next morning, I opened the door to see a big fucking bunch of flowers with a romantic message attached. It was a harmless message, but still not okay to do. So to the guy who thought it was okay to walk to my house in the middle of the night and leave me flowers, let's not meet. Also, maybe stop doing that sort of thing from now on. It's pretty creepy. I've never told this story to anyone other than my closest friends, but this felt like a good outlet to finally get this out my chest publicly. There's something called the 6 degrees of separation theory, which basically states that everyone in the world is separated by at most 6 steps. Well, I'm separated from Trent Reznor, 9 Inch Nails mastermind, by just 1 step, and it was due to a stalker. Back in 2009, I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, and I had just joined a pretty particular punk band, which mixed a very loud sound with cabaret-like visuals. We never made it big, but our act was appealing enough that it got the attention of many people. One of them was a strange girl, who was always chain-smoking, had a weird aura to herself, and who was always wearing a jacket on her shoulders, meaning her arms were not in the sleeves, and who eventually said she wanted to be our manager. She said that she was friends with Slash from Guns N' Roses, that she had managed a couple of bands when she used to live in New Orleans and whatnot, so we decided to hear her out. Her band was sort of a crazy one, so drugs passed freely at her parties. This girl, who told us her name was Christy or something, would provide us with party favors sometimes, would tell us that she was worth $2 million, that she had 5 cars, that she worked in this luxury building and had a huge house somewhere in the suburbs. The thing is, she was always picking cigarette butts off the street and smoking the filters, like she was some homeless person. Something about her just didn't click particularly with me. She always came to see us in sort of a fancy SUV, so we went along with her stories for the most part though. Eventually, Christy fell hard for me, told me she was divorcing her husband and that she wanted to be with me. I was intrigued by her, and so I started testing all her stories. I asked to visit her at her office, and she'd always make excuses of why I couldn't, until eventually she told me her office had closed down and they were looking for new space. I asked her why she was using the same car if she had like 5, and again, more and more excuses. I asked her to visit her huge house. and the same thing happened. She would come up with some excuses on why I couldn't come over, mostly that her husband was still there and whatnot. I started to get sick of all her excuses and eventually confronted her that I thought she was a liar. She got desperate, started to make more excuses, and I just told her to get lost. She had a previous fight with some of my bandmates before, so she had already been discarded as our manager. She started calling me every day asking to see me. I would constantly tell her no, and until one day she showed up at my house around 5 in the morning, apparently wasted. She said she had picked up this guy friend of hers to go to a party, but he was too drunk, and that he was now passed out in her car and she didn't know what to do with him. I looked across the street and saw no one in her car, and she said it was because the guy was laying down. I really didn't feel like bothering and going to her car to check it out. She eventually started crying, and I felt bad enough for her that I let her come into my living room. It was at this point that she took off her jacket, and for the first time ever, I realized she was missing her entire left arm. I was already giddy by her showing up at my house drunk and all, that I didn't dare asking how it happened. I know this has nothing to do with the story, but it was something that just added to the already weirded out atmosphere. I hung out with her for a while. At this point, I started doubting that she was actually drunk. I gave her coffee. I told her to please never show up to my house like that again, and eventually told her just to drop the guy off at a Waffle House and then just go home. It might not have been the most reasonable thing to tell someone in that state to drive, but I just wanted the whole thing to be over, and like I said, I felt like she was acting to be drunk the whole time, and she seemed okay enough to drive. She eventually left, and that was that for the night. The next day, again, she started stalking me by phone, to the point where I just stopped picking up. I worked early hours, and she would call me at 2 or 3 a.m., completely drunk. I eventually got sick of all of it, and told her to stay away from me and to never call me again. She complied, and for about a week, it seemed like the whole thing was history. Around 6 days later, she calls me again when I was at work. I started telling her that she wasn't supposed to call me, but she said that she could finally invite me over to the house, and she wanted me to come and visit her. All sorts of red flags went up for me, so of course I told her to forget about it and just hung up on her. She again started calling me at late hours, to the point that I just had to turn off my phone at night, otherwise I would never get a good night's sleep. I remember it was a Friday. After waking up, I had a voicemail on my phone. It was left around 2 in the morning. I checked it out. It was her saying, "Hi Max, I just took 200 pills and I've been drinking all night. I just wanted to say goodbye and that I love you. Good luck with the rest of your life." Needless to say, I got totally weirded out. I was so sick of her lies, I just deleted the message, completely assuming it was one of her attempts to get me to call her. I decided to forget about it and went to work. Next Tuesday after that, I get another voicemail from her phone, but this time it's a guy's voice. "Hi Max, this is Christy's husband. I'm calling our friends in her contacts list to let them know that she passed away last Friday, and we're doing a memorial for her in downtown Atlanta tomorrow. If you want to go, please call me back. I can give you the address." I can't even explain how I felt at that point. I was shocked, and I tried to evade the news by thinking this was some guy that Christy had manipulated into calling me, just to get me somewhere at some time. But, of course, the whole situation didn't make much sense to me. The guy eventually called another one of my bandmates, whose name was on Christy's contact list as well. I had told my band about this entire situation. My bandmate, who'd been suspicious of this girl for a while, started prying this guy for more info. We eventually learned that she used a fake name with us the whole time, that her real name was Amber, and that she was using a made-up name because she had been in trouble with the law. We googled her, and sure enough, turns out she stalked Trent Reznor in the past and managed to steal his credit card info. She was even arrested for it. I was stunned at this point, unsure of what to do next. We never went to the memorial. We were way too suspicious to do that. To this day, I still don't know if the girl committed suicide for real, or if the whole thing was some kind of shame to get me in trouble. But since I never heard from her again, I doubt it. Or maybe she's been using a fake name ever since and decided to move on with her life. I'll never know, but it's definitely one of the worst ways to get 1 degree of separation with someone famous. I got rid of my cell phone after that, and it took me 3 years until I felt okay enough to get a new one. I really never want to go through something like that ever again. I've been a fan of this thread for a long time, but never had a story that was interesting or creepy enough to contribute. Until my sister reminded me of a very weird encounter she experienced about 6 or 7 years ago, commuting in and out of London on the underground train. One evening, after work, which I believe to have been a Thursday, my sister went out for a few drinks with her colleagues, which is pretty normal as they say Thursday is the new Friday here in London. It must have been around 9 p.m. when my sister started her journey home, which takes about 30 to 40 minutes door to door. The first train that she got on was the Underground Tube, which would have been fairly busy around this time, a Thursday night, and this would give her no reason to be concerned about her safety, but still keeping her wits about her. However, shortly after getting on the train, she noticed a very tall white guy in his early 20s, same age as my sister at this point, who dressed in stereotypical goth clothing, long leather coat, chunky platform shoes, and pale, emotionless face that hid behind long black hair. Now, you see all sorts in London, especially on the underground at night, but what made my sister concerned is that ever since she noticed him, she realized he had been staring at her the entire time with a very expressionless, creeper, alerting look. In response to this, she acted as though she hadn't noticed and continued to mind her own business, knowing that she had a few more stops until she was to change trains and get rid of this weirdo. Her stop came, she got off, and so did the guy, pacing behind her in big, chunky boots and swaying long hair. Seeing as the station was a busy one that many people changed at, my sister tried to reassure herself that it was just a coincidence, and he just needed to change at a different train at the same station as her, although he just seems to be doing so with a very menacing look on his face. Keeping this in mind, my sister, having used that London Underground for about 5 years at this point, decided to test the guy by taking a secret tunnel. Basically a tunnel that is not signposted or advertised to be used to access the train platforms, but takes the same routes as all the others. Now, if the guy also took this route, then it would confirm that he is in fact following my sister, and she can then start to worry. She took the tunnel, so did he. She got on her train, so did he, all the while staring at her menacingly behind his long black hair. The trains were still busy at this point, so my sister didn't feel a threat as much, but wanted to get rid of the guy either way. He was seriously creeping her out, so she decided to stay at the next station. She would quickly step out the carriage, and then quickly jump right back on the train, and if the guy is following her, then he would hopefully lose her with this trick. The train arrived at the next station, and my sister hesitantly stepped out of the carriage onto the platform and acted as if she was assessing her journey before jumping back on again at the sound of the closing doors. The guy did the exact same thing. She was now definitely in panic mode and could see this guy was getting a thrill out of chasing/scaring her, and realized that she needed to get someone else on this fairly busy train aware. I must mention that most commuters on London's trains are so wrapped up in their newspapers, iPads, and phones that they would barely notice a nervous woman on the train, let alone a pregnant lady that deserves a seat. So my sister quickly starts looking at all the other people on the train who she feels would be safe to talk to or could approach possibly and help, and decides to approach, in panic, a fairly elderly couple that are sitting down. Excuse me, please help me. A man is following me and I'm scared. Can I please sit with you? Now, if there isn't anything that my sister has taken from this experience, it is to not approach elderly couples in times of need. They were bloody blind. The poor couple were understandably taken aback by my sister's claims, and not being able to see who she was, they were a little reluctant to talk to her. So she pretty much summed up her life story in the 15-minute train journey that she had left, while they eventually assured her that they would stay with her. Not too many stops left from the station nearest to our home. My sister called her dad, who came to pick her up immediately. My sister, the elderly couple in tow, got off the station and the creepy guy followed, although lagging behind now. All three got in the cab as my dad offered the elderly couple a lift home for helping out my sister, and they watched the weird gothic guy walk off into the high street smiling. Luckily, my sister got home safe, with only a story to reveal, but all the family wondered what that guy's intentions really were. A cheap thrill, or to fulfill a creepy fantasy. On behalf of my sister, weird goth guy, let's not meet again. Okay, so this happened to me earlier, and I don't think I'll be sleeping tonight. I'm currently staying in a remote part of the United Kingdom and having a break from working, which means more time to pursue my hobbies, one being photography. I scoped out a creepy looking tree formation in a nearby forest and set my camera and tripod up as the sun was coming down. As you know, for that extra creepy vibe. As I'm happily taking photos, I see a woman pass through the entrance to the arched trees. This woman had parked her car next to mine when I arrived. She went past a couple of times, looking at me for prolonged periods, with each time she passed. I assume she wants to come up this path, but sees I'm taking photos and decides to walk elsewhere. Approximately 5 minutes go by, and she appears again, this time walking towards me, dragging her left side slightly with a strange limp. She stops once and stares at me for a few seconds, then starts walking towards me again. I ask her if she's okay. I'm starting to put my camera away at this point, and readying my tripod for me to use for self-defense, just in case, because the vibe I'm getting is way off with this lady, as she starts grunting at me, then stops and stares again. It's at this point that this woman is close enough for me to realize that she's actually a man in woman's clothing, with a wig. An uncomfortable moment passes, and she starts grunting again, walks towards the edge of the path, grabs a pile of leaves, and starts throwing them around, grunts some more, and then walks off aimlessly into the forest. I call my friend to tell her what happened, and ask her to stay on the phone with me in case this person comes back. I'll take a couple more photos, and then I'm out. For a good 10 minutes, I hear the crunching of leaves circling in the forest, and I try to convince myself that it's the wildlife. Then, just silence. I take the photos, and I haven't seen or heard the person for around 15 minutes now, so I assume I'm safe. I leave the path, and see the car is gone. Thank fuck. However, I quickly notice that there is a man walking towards me from the entrance. It's the same fucking guy. He has changed into men's attire, and as he walks past me, he shoots me a grin that sends shivers down my spine. I don't scare easily, but this guy just gave me all the wrong signals, causing this overwhelming feeling of dread to wash over me. I'm still on the phone at this point and holding my tripod over my shoulder, just in case. I quickened my pace and got back into my car. As I did so, I saw him come out of the lane I had been going down, stop and look around, then starts walking towards my car with intent. This part is all on video. I video for a while and then haul the fuck out of there, driving past his car that he had moved down the road, thinking, what in the graybeard fuck just happened? Limping, leaf-throwing forest stalker? I hope we don't meet again. Note, I did report this to the non-emergency police number, just because it was so fucking weird, and I absolutely got the whole, this guy could hurt someone feeling as I walked past him. I think I should start with a bit of background information. I'm a 17-year-old guy from the United Kingdom, Scotland, and in my area, it is not uncommon to have an odd junkie roaming around, kinda like stray dogs. Don't worry, this all shall become relevant soon enough. Anyway, on with the story. It was a lovely July day last year, and I had just got finished doing my chores for the day, and was stoked to get outside. I finished up cleaning and headed out. My female friend, we'll call her Levi, had met me just outside my front garden, as she had lived close enough to aid me in my walk. Now, I should mention I was smoking a cigarette-sized blunt at this point, and I was almost done. We literally were about a couple of 100 yards away from the house, but couldn't see my house because the path was a twisted one, with houses at each side sheltering it, when an older-looking man, about mid-30s, dressed in a normal jogging suit with a backpack and a waterproof jacket over it all, approached us. We had just came around a bend. It was almost as if he was waiting there. My female friend was to the right of me, may I add. This was the first thing that set alarm bells off in my mind, but no big deal. I assumed that it was just a junkie about to ask us for a cigarette or some money. But before I could even react to seeing this man almost appear out of nowhere, he starts talking into a label of his jacket, rhyming off codes and numbers like they were a common practice. The man stated he was a police officer and that he was under suspicion that I had marijuana on my person. In my country, we have CID, which are basically undercover police officers who wear civilian clothing to catch people off guard. So me being the trusting person I am, or just really not wanting to get into trouble, asked the officer what the problem was. By this point, I could clearly tell this man was giving Levi the creeps, and she stuck close to me. What happens next still baffles me to this day, but also fills me with such relief, because I can assure you things could have been much worse. The supposed officer then proceeded to do the usual, stand against the fence, legs apart, arms in opposite direction routine, while he searched me. The search set off extreme alarm bells, as it wasn't the careful, very delicate police standard. The search was rushed and hasty and sloppy, and made me feel quite violated. I knew after this that we needed to get out of here. The man was acting visibly agitated when his first search turned out fuck all for the drugs he was claiming I had. Out of the blue, things make a turn for the worse. The man starts asking peculiar questions. He asks me heavily about drugs, if I have any, etc. He then asked me to empty my pockets. He searched my tobacco and then took my phone. By this point, the man was pushing me around and growing more and more agitated with every one of his questions. Where are you hiding your drugs? I seriously had nothing on me, and this man clearly wanted something that I didn't have, and I knew if I don't do something, he would act out, or so I assumed. He looked at my phone, then up to me. His eyes were crystal blue, like ice. In this short ordeal, I had never made eye contact with this guy, but as my gaze met his, I knew that this man wasn't fucking around. He chilled my blood as his stare bored right into me. He asked if he could find drug dealers on my phone, which I tell you right now, a police officer would not ask. I kept refuting, and then just as quickly as the ordeal started, it was over. The aggression had turned into panic, as if a switch had been flipped. The man pushed me away frantically, then shouted, "Fuck off, run away, get out of here." Obviously, we legged it out and didn't look back. Something I should mention, the man didn't address my female friend the whole time. She stood in complete shock through this whole thing. So weird junkie pretending to be a police officer, let's never have to meet again. I'm a long-time lurker, first-time poster. Thought I'd need to share this story here since I've never posted anything. About 7 years ago when I was 17, my parents went out of town for a weekend and left me home. This was a pretty common occurrence. My parents trusted me. I would usually spend these weekends away staying with friends or family, as my parents' house is a bit too creepy to be alone in, even during the day. We live in a small rural town where everybody knows each other, and generally it's a pretty quiet place. It's also quite safe. Saturday I was supposed to stay with a friend, but her parents decided last minute to not let me stay. It wasn't a big deal that I had to leave. I was somewhat prepared to have to go home because her parents got weird about company sometimes. I left our house, which is about 15 minutes away from my parents' house, around 9:30 or 9:45. While I was on the way home, I got a weird feeling that I can't really explain. I just knew that I didn't want to stay at my parents' while home alone. I called my brother and asked if I could stay with him. At the time, he was living with a woman who had a small child. He told me it would be quieter and easier for him just to come stay with me, since his dog would bark if I tried to come in the house. He said he would be at our parents in 20 minutes. Side note, that's relative later. My brother's a relatively scared-looking guy. He's about 6'3" and 200 pounds. Pretty muscular and covered in tattoos. After hanging up, I decided to stop at a gas station to grab a snack before going home, so that my brother would be there when I got there. I pulled into the gas station. There were only a few cars in the lot, which was typical because this is a small town in a rural south where everything is pretty much stopped after 8 p.m. I parked and walked up to the door. There was a man standing outside the door smoking. He opened the door for me without saying anything. This is a normal southern hospitality, especially since I'm female. I smiled and thanked him. Inside, there's another man standing by the door. I noticed him staring at me as soon as I came in. I gave him that gross up and down look, and he said something creepy to the effect of, "Hey sexy, what are you doing alone?" Creepy as fuck. I just ignored him and walked towards the back of the store. He yelled after me and called me a bitch. I ignored him. I figured he was drunk or high or just an asshole. Most people around here talk big game but rarely back it up. I wasn't scared, just annoyed. I got my snacks and paid at the counter. When I walked back to the door, both the men were gone. I was happy I wouldn't have to deal with any more catcalling. I began walking across the lot towards my car, which was probably about 100 feet away from the door. As I was walking, I looked down at my phone to see if enough time had passed for my brother to be at my parents'. When I look up, the asshole who hit on me was standing at the pump staring. I looked at him for a second and continued walking. "Hey you know you're supposed to answer a man when he speaks to you," he said. I remember saying something snarky back to him. Getting in my car, he looked pissed at my sarcasm. I locked my doors as soon as I got in the car and started it, and was thinking of nothing but getting home to eat my snacks and hang out with my brother. I put my car in gear and realized the man had disappeared. I looked around before pulling out of my parking spot, only to realize that both men were sitting in the car facing mine across the lot. They were both staring at me and talking, occasionally even pointing towards me. I just stared at them, defiant and pissed. I didn't want them to think they scared me at all. While we were sitting having our staring contest, the man who had opened the door for me smiled and gave me the finger across the throat gesture, as in, "You're dead." I rolled my eyes and pulled out of the gas station. To my dismay, they pulled out behind me. I hadn't been scared until this point, because, as I said, most people hear a lot of talk, no follow through. Instead of going home, I took a few back roads that connect back in sort of a circle to see if they were really following me, which of course they were. When they realized I was testing them, they drove up really close to me and started laying on the horn. I could see the headlights, they were so close. I called my brother and told him what was going on. He told me to come home and that he would handle it. I started driving home and the two assholes were still following me. They were riding my ass and blowing their horn. Even with my detours, I was only about 3 to 4 minutes away from my parents' house. I slowed down to pull in the driveway and was immediately relieved. At the end of the driveway, my brother was standing shirtless, with his shoulders back, hands crossed, in front of his stomach, clearly holding a pistol. His intimidating looking pit bull sitting by his side. I drove around him into the yard. The two guys actually started to pull behind me until they saw my brother. Then they hightailed it out of there. I have no idea what they would have done if I had stopped somewhere alone or kept driving. I always think fondly of that image of him standing there like a badass. I'm thankful he was there. The story came out of nowhere. I truly wasn't expecting any of this. I've had creepy people and weird things happen, but generally speaking, I'm aware of my surroundings and don't have many issues. I had just broken up with a boyfriend, moved back home for the summer until school was starting back up. I got full-time work at the 7-Eleven gas station a mile away from my parents' house and goofed off with my hometown friends. That was my summer plan, and things were going quite well for the first month. I never really realized how many creeps came into the gas station, and we were in a fairly nice suburb area. We of course had our regulars, and one of them was a late 30s guy who started to intentionally wait in my longer line to be checked out by me and various things like that. Looking back, it was a bit obvious. A 21-year-old girl that, due to a previous abusive relationship, did not see myself as fairly attractive. I just thought these guys were really friendly and nice. So first he starts only coming to my register, then suddenly I would see him a few times a shift. I noticed he would always seem very polite, well-mannered, never really giving out any skeeky vibes. He had a couple of tween daughters that would be with him here and there, which made him seem more harmless to me. Generally, I would work the early morning shifts, but flip to later shifts as I've been a night owl, getting maybe a couple hours of sleep before I had to go in. When that happened, this creep was upset with me because he wasn't able to come in to see me because he worked a second shift. At this point, I was actively avoiding him, stalking the Kohler if I saw him pull up and stuff like that. He started to show when I would get off work, and I would delay myself until he left. Then I started getting notes and flowers on my car, until one night, I'm walking out to my vehicle, and he popped up from behind it. I backed up and told him that I was not interested at all. He assured me that he would woo me to change my mind. I switched schedules, working nights, days, mornings, all over the place, so that my schedule wasn't predictable. I'm working one afternoon when comes this batshit crazy woman with 2 younger girls. So she starts asking her daughters, "Is this the girl?" To which they replied yes. Maniac woman screams and threatens me to stay away from her husband, and I'm like, "Whoa lady, I have no idea who you're talking about." Apparently the psycho stalker man is married and had been telling his wife he has a younger hot gas station girlfriend that's moving in and blah blah blah. This lady is nuts. Her daughters looked super embarrassed and she was not leaving the gas station. The store owner watched on video from the back and called the cops, and the lady was told to leave. At the time, I was dating and going out on a few dates, and this one handsome guy started coming up to make sure when I left at night that the guy wasn't gonna pop out again. Normally at nights, we had 2 people, but the other girl had called in. I have no idea how the creepy stalker man noticed, but he slipped in 10 minutes to close and said he just wanted to, quote, keep me company while I was doing nightly closing activities. He was making weird comments about how no girl should be left here alone late at night like this. Why won't I give him a chance? He will move me in, buy me a car, and all kind of creepy things. I told him no thank you, your wife wasn't too keen on this either. This guy flew into a rage, knocked over a display, and started screaming at me, "What did you tell her?" All crazy man style. At this point, I'm trapped inside a gas station after close, but I don't dare go out to the parking lot where I parked my car. It is off to the side at the back of the store. It's dark and obviously my stalker friend will follow. Thank goodness my guy I was seeing happened to be coming home from work and noticed my car was still at the gas station and came to check on me. As soon as he came to the door, he could see my panic and took creeper storming away into the night. He helped pick up the display mess, sat with me until I stopped shaking and encouraged me to quit the gas station pronto. We called the police. It's a small town, and he was easily found with his white Kia driving erratically. The officer followed up with me. He had a knife, rope, and duct tape. Creepy married gas station stalker, let's not meet again. I was reading over some of these stories here, and after a while of debating, I decided to make an account so I could share my own experiences. It was the middle of the night, maybe 12 or 1 in the morning, and I had snuck out to get a bag of chips or something from the gas station a few blocks away from my house. It was in the middle of December, and it was snowing pretty heavily outside. For the record, I was 14 or 15 at the time. I've always been pretty small, at about 5'4" in height and 115 pounds in weight. I'm female, but I've always had short hair and kind of a boyish face. The gas station was completely empty, besides a woman behind the cash register, who I remember being far too busy filing her nails than to pay any attention. I had been picking through some of the chip bags to find something good when I heard the ding of the door as someone entered the small gas station. I didn't bother to look to see who it is. When I finally turned, I found what I was looking for. I turned and headed towards the refrigerated section for a drink, before seeing the person who had just walked through the door. It was a tall, thin man, maybe 6'2" with brown hair, a red trucker hat, and a short, scruffy beard. He looked like he was in his late 30s or early 40s. I was surprised that I didn't recognize the man. I lived in a small mountain town, and everyone kinda knew everyone. Oddly enough, he was wearing a short-sleeved t-shirt and shorts, despite it being freezing cold outside. His shirts and pants were covered in grass stains, as if he had just been working on a lawn or something. He turned to me and smiled, a toothy grin, before moving from the door to the refrigerated area so that I could grab what I needed. I know I shouldn't have seen anything wrong with this, but something about the grin and the way his eyes looked me over already kind of was a red flag. I've been a very nervous and paranoid person my whole life. I moved in and opened the door, quickly grabbing a drink and backing off. Before I could turn away, I heard the man's raspy voice as he spoke to me. "Hey, you look familiar," the man said. He had somewhat of a southern accent, which wasn't all that uncommon considering where I lived. Yeah, I responded, not sure what to say to him. He introduced himself as Thomas, before leaning against the door. "What is a young man like you doing out here so late?" he asked. Again, I wasn't sure what to say. I wasn't a boy, for one, but I didn't bother to correct him. I was just getting a snack," I responded, trying to inch my way away from him, trying to give off the hint that I don't want to be talked to. Yet the man just trailed behind me. "Do you know my daughter?" he asked, cutting me off in the aisles. "Well, who is your daughter?" I I asked shakily in response. The man frowned at me, his eyes narrowing in my direction. He refused to tell me her name, claiming that he didn't want boys touching her daughter. I was confused by the sudden change of mood, so I didn't say anything else. I started making my way towards the register before he cut me off again. "Do you need a ride? It's cold out there," he said, getting uncomfortably close. At this point, I could smell the alcohol in Thomas's breath. It made me very uncomfortable. "No, thank you," I said, trying to move around him. He insisted, and yet again, I refused. I moved to try to push past him, bumping into a metal shelf. A can of chips fell off the shelf, hitting the floor. The lady behind the register looked up from what she was doing, noticed me and the man. "Are you ready to check out?" she asked, glaring at Thomas. I nodded, and the man moved out of my way. I paid for the chips and drink before thanking the woman and moving out of the gas station, but it didn't end there. When I began my walk down the snowy road, I saw the man get into his truck before getting out a minute later. I was already quite a ways away when he began walking the same direction I was. I would have called for someone to help at this point, but I didn't have a phone at the time. I'd quickened my pace and eventually he turned around and went home. I don't want to think about what would have happened if the man would have kept following me. So Thomas, I don't think we should meet again. Sorry ahead of time for any format issues. I'm posting this from my cell phone. So for context, I'm a 22-year-old male, and I live in a large city in the Midwest. Now, I drive for Lyft while putting myself through trade school. I drive for other similar companies, but that's besides the point. I have many horror stories from all those, but I'll tell those another time. It was Christmas Eve 2020. I was out running Lyft for a few hours before heading to my mom's with my new baby and wife. Nothing special going on that night, just the usual. I get a ride request. It was a pickup from this kind of lower income apartment complex. No big deal. I arrive and I find my passenger. He has all his belongings, several boxes of stuff. Now, my car's a 2006 Chevy Impala, so it's not too big. We get all his stuff loaded up, barely, and are on our way. During the ride, he's crying saying his girlfriend was cheating on him, and he had walked in on them earlier that night. He couldn't stay there because it was her name on the lease, so I was taking him to a hotel. Now, in my city, we have a street that is well known for vices, hookers, drugs, gangs, weapons, and shady motels. The works. We get to the motel that is in that part of town, and he asked me to wait for him to check in and get his key. "No problem, man," I say. I'll confess, I break the rules a little bit when it comes to Lyft. I have a gun hidden in a concealed holster, secured to the underside of my driver's seat for protection. Reason being, driving Lyft and other contract apps, I've had knives and guns pulled on me, as well as had people try to fight me, rob me, and all kinds of other things. But, like I said, another time. Since this motel was on the street that I mentioned before, homeless people were everywhere. There was a dude on the far corner of the complex that had a needle still in his arm, passed out against the building. And I'm a fan of true crime and horror narration, so I'm on edge. He gets his key. The whole motel is ground level, so to help the guy out, I drive to his door. As I mentioned before, we had a lot of stuff, so I started to help him unload his stuff. While on my second trip of getting stuff, I saw a guy come out of a room just to the south of my car, followed by two ladies. They came to the room I was next to, not my passenger. One of the ladies pounded on the door, then opened it. That's when I saw in the room a guy raise a fucking shotgun out of his long coat and stormed into the room. The two ladies followed him, slamming the door behind them. Following, I heard a lot of yelling and shouting. I was just waiting for shots to ring out. Out of nowhere, my passenger came behind me. "I can take this, man. Go ahead and take off. Have a Merry Christmas." And he gave me a cash tip. I didn't even notice he took the boxes out of my hands or slid $5 into my pocket. I was frozen. I knew what may have been going on in that room. I had to leave, or at least get to where I could get my gun. I know the guy and both ladies saw me, and I know they knew I saw the gun. I had to get out of there. You know, no witnesses. I got in my car and sped away quickly. I got a block or so away and called the cops. I gave them every detail. After I got off the phone with the police, I signed out of Lyft. I hadn't made much money, but I was done. I got a call later that night. The cops investigated. They never found the gunman or the woman. They never answered the door I saw them come out of, and the occupants of the room they went into said they had nothing happen. Well, I know what I saw. So to the gunman I saw with the shotgun, who I'm sure was trying to make a statement to someone about debt, let's not meet again. I have other creepy encounters as well that I might post here, but I'll write this one first since it's the most current one. It happened about 2 hours ago, and I'm still contemplating whether or not I should call the cops. First off, you need to know that I live in a poor Eastern European country, in a big city, but in a bad neighborhood. At least that's what I've been told. I've actually never encountered any creepy individuals that would want to do any harm. Just your usual vandals and troublemakers, never anyone serious. I'm also still a teenager and live with my parents, but growing up in this environment, I consider myself to be quite street smart. This was a feature that helped me whenever I was in trouble. It turned out to be pretty useful today. At about 3 p.m., my dad left for ping pong practice, and I knew he'd be back at about 8. He would usually go out for a beer with his friends afterwards to chill. And coincidentally, my older brother and mom left to help one of her friends to clean up the place after a New Year's party. It was New Year's Day. I should have came along, but today I felt sick and decided I should just really stay in. In reality, I was very hungover, but my mom doesn't know that. I was probably the luckiest I've ever been. You'll find out why in a minute. So all of my family leaves except for me. Naturally, I've been home alone before, so that doesn't really make me uneasy at all. But having been a long-time reader of this subreddit, I take more precaution than I used to. Like check to see if the door is closed, turn off the lights when not needed, etc. The evening goes by just like any other. I'm rewatching episodes of Skins, the UK version when suddenly I feel the urge to go get a snack. Just behind my apartment complex, there was this very well-known supermarket on which I always rely on whether I'm in deep need of a snack. So that was like a 5-minute walk. I put my coat on and some flip-flops and I'm out. It's freezing outside and I could see the bright lights of the supermarket in the distance. But something was off. In front of the automatic doors there was a small, robust figure. As I got closer, I could distinguish his face. It was this man whose face I've never seen before. I remember him on countless occasions roaming around our blocks of flats, but never actually thought anything of it. He was dressed poorly and was staying in front of the doors as if he was guarding them. I asked if the supermarket was still open, and he pointed at the paper which was clipped near this schedule. It said it closed at 6 p.m. due to the holiday season, it being New Year's Day. It was 6:20 p.m. I let out a sigh and wanted to turn around to go home, but he told me in an alarmed voice that there was a very close corner store next to the supermarket. I told him that I didn't need anything important and that I would just come back tomorrow, but he kept on insisting and said it was a 2-minute walk from there. All the while, he was staring at me in a weird manner. It was the first red flag, but I found a logical explanation in my mind, thinking that maybe this guy was just very eager to help me. Maybe so I'd just give him some money. That sort of made sense in my mind, but I was still alert. So I walked to the corner store and took whatever I could find fastest, paid, wished the shop owner Happy New Year, and left in a hurry. As time passed, I was getting more and more nervous for some reason. I guess it was just my gut telling me that something was off. What really made me switch was the fact that I'd been gone for about 5 minutes, and as I was passing the supermarket, the guy who was usually roaming the area was nowhere to be seen. At that point, I started jogging towards my apartment, all the while trying to calm myself and imagining a plausible explanation as to why this guy was there no more. I got to the bottom of the stairs of the front door, and in the distance, I'm short-sighted, I noticed a tall figure entering the elevator at the same time, almost planned. The automatic light switched off. I desperately ran towards the interphone and clumsily got my keys to open the door. As I ran to the elevator, it was still running. I live on the 7th floor. I could see it up to the 3rd, then the 4th, then the 5th, then it stopped. I let out a big sigh of relief, but was still skeptical, so I took the stairs. As I was walking up the stairs, almost laughing, I noticed that above me, the light on the 6th floor was on. That was a bit alarming, but I kept on walking. Suddenly, I saw the light on the 7th floor turned on and I stopped, looked above, and hoped whoever it was would go to the 8th floor. A minute passed, which felt like hours, and the light on the 7th floor was still on. I decided to take action, so I ran all the way to my floor, and I saw something that almost made me pass out. The tall, dark figure was kneeling at my doorknob, trying to what I presumed to be lockpick my door. In these kinds of situations, I rarely got angry. I just want whatever is going on to stop. So from afar, I shout a very weak "hey" at the guy. In an instant, he turns around and stands up. I see him for a split second, and he looks fucking terrified. Long black trench coat, a hat, and leather gloves. He smiles at me and reveals his yellow unkept teeth. He fucking smiles at me. Do you know that stomach-turning feeling when you stumble upon something that is so scarily out of this world and wrong that you just cannot look away, but you want to? That was that, amplified to by, like, 1,000. I was shitting my pants, and, to my surprise, the man took off running. Before he reached the stairs, he mumbled a "sorry" and ran away. I was still in shock and couldn't follow him or call the police, or even move for that matter. I easily got to the door of my apartment and noticed that there was a pen stuck in there. Yep, he was definitely trying to get into my house. Who knows what he wanted to do. My parents won't be back for about 2 more hours. I'm not sure if I should tell them or even call the cops. Thinking in retrospect, I think this tall man and the man in front of the supermarket may have conducted a plan. It would have been all too convenient for him to catch me off guard like that. Either way, it's a scary thought. One more thing is for certain, I'll be keeping a bat in my room from now on. So much for New Year's resolutions. So tall, dark man that wanted to enter my home uninvited? Let's not meet. Edit. I've called my parents first, and while they were away, they said they'd get home ASAP and told me to call the cops right there after they hung up. And they told me to make sure all the doors were locked, and also that they'd call a neighbor from the 2nd floor, a very nice old lady, to keep me company until the police arrives. I've talked to the officer and explained the situation and also showed him the lockpick, and he took it as evidence. I also gave a detailed description of the man from the supermarket, and I tried to describe the lockpicker himself, but that was still in a blur. He said he'll leave some of his men to patrol the area. I was lucky he was very nice about it. Police here usually aren't. So when I was about 7 or 8-ish, my parents took me to a Christmas market that had tons of activities for kids. I didn't know this at the time, but my parents were fighting and this preoccupied and just mostly left me on my own. The way it worked was you bought some tickets at the door and then you could go inside and use one ticket for one activity. There was stuff like baking cookies, painting stuff, wood burning for older kids, etc. It was pretty fantastic. Some of the stuff had lines if there was a lot of interest. Now I'd gotten about 10 tickets, and an activity was about 15 minutes. My parents were in the cafe in the building, but well out of sight. Since it was an area where you could get into if you're accompanied with a kid, or were a kid, I guess they felt safe leaving me alone. This was allowed, but not encouraged. Anyway, I was lining up for my favorite activity there, the fabric printing section, where you got this piece of linoleum and could draw Christmas patterns and stuff on it. It was already my 3rd time, but whatever, right? In the line, I was about halfway to the entrance. Someone grabbed my arm. I panicked immediately because my parents would never touch me like that, and I knew nobody else there. I yelped and tried to pull away, but couldn't. Turning, I saw it was an older lady, maybe 40s to 50s. I'm still not sure. She was well dressed, looking pretty strict but normal. Anyway, she was pulling me out of the line against my will. I tried to yell and ask her to let me go, but she said something like, "You always do this. Come on, Marie." My name is not Marie, not even close. I kept on yelling, still thinking that she was just confusing me for someone else. I was a pretty average looking girl with a brunette ponytail, nothing particularly special, nor were my clothes. She looked down at me again, scoffed, and told me to stop throwing a tantrum and that we were going home. It was at that exact moment that I realized if I didn't escape, she would take me away. So I just basically opened my mouth and screamed at the top of my lungs. Not words, just a screech. Before that, I'd mostly just been asking to be released, loud but not full on screaming. I guess I was a polite kid. She paused mid-step because clearly I'd startled her, but didn't let go yet, so I just screamed about the only thing I could really make sense of. My name is Sam. This was the first time that people actually looked at us as more than a mom or a grandma and a kid in a tantrum, because I'm clearly too old to not know my name, and also visibly scared. I was still trying to pull away and she had a grip on my forearm like a vice. I made eye contact with the first person I saw looking over. A guy, early 30s I guess, definitely younger than her. I just pled for him to help me, and he actually came over at that point. We were in the sight of the exit. She dragged me quite far, and I guess at that point she decided it was too much of a hassle and let me go, since I'd been fighting her. I immediately slammed into the ground, which actually prompted more people to step up to me and help. I was sobbing, and as soon as I could get on my feet, I ran the other direction to my parents. I must have barreled into like 10 or more people on the way to where I knew my parents were. There was a cafe, like I said, and they were in the middle. My mom has super recognizable fake red hair, so even sobbing, I could make her out easily. I banged into the table, knocking stuff off, and just threw myself at my mother. I was in no state to explain, and she was both mad at me for making a scene and really fucking worried because I was not the type of kid to cause a disturbance, pretty much ever. I wanted to explain but couldn't. There's a bit of commotion around, with people being noisy, but as I calmed down, I realized that the guy I had begged for help was explaining to my parents what happened. I haven't even noticed him come with, but I kind of tuned in when he kept on asking if my grandma was here or something, and that if I could have known that woman, and asking if they knew who she was. Obviously, my mother confirmed that that was not the case, and asked if what he'd told her was right. He confirmed that some woman was dragging me off, calling me Marie. My parents, the guy, and his son, who was a fair few years older than me, maybe 15 or so, went to the security, where I tried and failed to describe the lady. The guy had a much better description of her, but obviously she was long gone. I think they called the police, but I never spoke to any cops that I can remember. I felt really awkward and sorry that I ruined the other kid's day there, so I gave him the rest of my tickets so that he could do more stuff that he wanted. He was really nice and gave me a pack of cookies he baked to eat while the adults were talking. I don't remember any of their names or anything, but I remember how grateful I was to the kid, more so than his dad even. It just really comforted me that I had another kid around who was nice. Anyway, my parents took me home ASAP, of course, and we never went to that place again. There was a short story in the newspaper the next day about a kidnapping scare my mother told me some years later, but it was all just a speculation, and they didn't even confirm in the paper if it was an attempt or just a misunderstanding. Well, sure as shit it wasn't a misunderstanding. They never caught the lady, or did any follow-ups, as far as I'm aware at least. I actually had bruises on my arm where she gripped me through my sweater. I don't like Christmas markets much anymore. I'm not certain that this story belongs in the sub, but involves a story that does involve a level of stalking. I figure I would post it here. To gain a proper context of this story, I should explain some things about the town that I grew up in. I lived, and still live, in one of the wealthier countries in the United States. You have two towns that fall in the low middle class bracket, with the majority being middle to upper middle class. I lived in one of those towns. At the time of this story, 1995 or 96, the majority of the town was white, with a very few Hispanic and Asian families. Seeing as I'm a minority, I used to be teased and bullied due to the color of my skin. As it was a suburban neighborhood, it was never beyond racial slurs or light bullying though. On to the story. The town has 5 schools, not including the Catholic school. There are 2 that cater to the pre-K to 5th grade crowd, while the other 2 go from pre-K to 8th grade, one of each type in the north and south side of town, with a high school that takes in children from north and south sides respectively. I was attending the pre-K to 5th on the north side of town. I had never heard much about a particular teacher until when it was getting close to when I was entering the 5th grade. Apparently, everybody wanted to be in his class. His name was John. He had been teaching at the school for a number of years. His family participated in many town events, and he was the coach for the high school baseball and softball teams for a number of years after this incident occurred. Parents loved him so much that they would push for their child to attend his class. It did not work that way. You were assigned to a teacher by alphabetical order, not preference. For the first month or so, I could see why everybody loved him. He taught in a way that was quirky but practical. He liked the children to engage in their studies rather than feel the need to cram it in before dismissing it. He had a passion for every lesson he taught. Keep in mind that for primary school, the teacher would cover all topics from mathematics to English to history. He loved to joke around and get his students laughing whenever possible. That's what led to the beginning of when things began to go sour. One day, he had told a particularly funny joke. Everyone in the class began laughing. One by one, the kids began to quiet down until one student, AJ, was the only one left laughing. To this day, I do not know the motivation behind it, but when AJ could not calm himself down, John walked behind him and in a swift movement, grabbed the back of his head, slammed it twice against his desk before pulling it back up. AJ sort of toppled over and fell to the ground. Everyone in the classroom was silent. John then began to semi-kick/sweep AJ out of the classroom. His desk was the second one from the door, until he was in the hallway, and then, as though nothing happened, he continued going on with his lesson. The next day, AJ was absent. We had a substitute teacher, and all the students were being called down to the principal's office. When I was called to the principal's office, there was the principal, and then there was a police officer there too, who I recognized from the DARE program. And then there was a man and a woman in suits. I later concluded that it was CPS. They wanted to know what happened yesterday in class. I told them what I had seen, and then I was sent back up to class. 2 days later, AJ was still absent, but John was back to teaching. I need to really stress that John and his family were very connected and well liked throughout the town. I say this because, though this happened almost 20 years ago, I cannot understand how he was allowed to keep his job. He knew that I had told the truth. From then on out, the abuse began lightly. The first thing John would do is begin volunteering me to answer any questions and all questions he had while teaching. It made no difference if other children raised their hands when he asked a question. He would always call on me. I was always shy and never liked to stand out in the crowd. And the more he did this, the more I became nervous as whether I did or didn't know the answer. He would chuckle and say things like, "Of course you don't know," or "I don't expect much of you." After a few weeks, I began receiving detention for others misbehaving. If kids were caught talking or passing notes, it was my fault, even if I was sitting across the room. The first thing he did since I was a quote, absolutely such a troublemaker, was pick up my desk. It was a desk with a chair attached to it, along with me in it, and move it to the back of the room near the closets. As I was adopted, it was well known in my town, as I made a speech in 4th grade about how I was adopted and proud to be an American. The next step was having me face the wall, as only true Americans should be able to learn. One particular incident that I will never forget is when a classmate had made a paper plane and thrown it across the room. When John saw that, I had detention for the afternoon. I had detention almost every afternoon for the rest of the year. When everyone else had left for his assignment, I had to stay back and write a 500-word essay on history. Keep in mind, I had no books. We were not learning what he was trying to tell me to write an essay about in social studies, and I was 10 years old. I was sitting in the classroom until 4:30 when I finally stood up. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, standing up to match my movements. "I'm leaving. I can't do this anymore, and my mom is waiting for me outside." I lived about 6 blocks from the school, but I was hoping he would think that I had a concerned parent outside and he would let me leave. When I saw that he didn't believe that, I dashed for the door without my books or book bag and bolted down the stairs until I hit the first floor. I breathed a sigh of relief, but I was cut short as I heard the second floor stairway door slam open and then his footsteps rushing down the stairs. I bolted out of the back doors and did not stop running until I was down the block from my house. At the time, both my parents were working. My mom would normally get home around 3 or 4, whereas my dad would get home until 6 to 9 at night. My mom initially thought that I was saying these things about my teacher because I wanted attention, but when it started to become common for me to come home and crawl into the fetal position as I cried for a couple hours, she began to do some investigating. Before I knew it, my mom was at the school after hours almost every day fighting for justice, or to have me placed in another classroom. Much later in my life, I heard that my mom had a meeting with the principal and John. She explained what I had told her that had been happening. John's response to her was, "I don't really see what I'm doing wrong here," with a smug grin on his face. The principal believed me and my mom and was willing to fight for me. This is why I say that I wanted to stress that him and his family had leverage in my town. The day the principal promised us that he would begin investigating into the matter, the Board of Education made him an offer. In exchange for dropping any investigation, they would promote him to superintendent. Immediately, he was gone and a substitute principal was put in place. who I also had later as a substitute teacher in the 7th grade. I would think that he was told that he was there until a replacement principal could be found. No investigations were ever launched, and any further complaints to the temporary principal were met with, quote, "My hands are too tied, and there's nothing we can do." This story can continue for a while, but I'll focus on what happened as a form of retaliation for getting my mother involved. One day, right before recess, John told my classmates, while I was in the room, that I was not a true American, and people like me needed to learn my place. He suggested that they do what they felt they should do to make me feel welcomed on the playground, and to spread the word to the other kids in the other classes. The first day I went outside to play for lunch, I had 2 kids double team on me. I was bullied relentlessly. If I even tried to take a swing at another kid who was standing around, they would push me so that I would lose my balance. Since John had taken the volunteer role of watching over the kids during recess and lunchtime, no one came to my aid. For the rest of the school year, I was eating my lunch and spending my recess and lunch periods inside the stairwell with my niece and a few of the special education kids to keep me company. By the end of the school year, I had gotten used to sitting outside of the classroom for portions of the class. My troublemaking was bad enough, where sitting in the back turned away from everybody else wasn't effective anymore. Detentions were common, and my mother was in the office almost every day. What I was afraid of most was that everyone from my class would be transferred over to North Pre-K to 8th grade school, and since most of them had taken to beating up on me on and off the playground, I feared that this would continue. I did not know what had to be done, but I was ordered to seek child psychology, and there was an exception granted so I could go to the counterpart school on the southern side of town. I've relayed this story, and I know that it sounds far-fetched and completely made up. After all, how could someone get away with all this without any repercussions? To be honest, I don't have all the answers. I discovered later on that, besides AJ, whose parents began at-home teaching from then on out, I was the only one who had told the truth about what happened. Later on, kids admitted that their parents had told them to lie if they were ever asked about what took place. When you have a teacher with a solid track record who is a pillar in the local community and donates money and resources to the town versus the word of 2 10-year-olds, I guess it was not enough to hold it against him. I spoke to the old principal when I hit adulthood about the entire ordeal, and he admitted that John had connections with the police and CPS. It was how he found out I had said anything, and though he hated to admit it, the principal had been bribed to keep his mouth shut and move on. I told him that I held nothing against him and still speak to him on a rare occasion. I can't say John is a defining person in my life. He changed how I saw the world, people, and the issues caused from that ordeal left me with issues that I still deal with today. Even when I was 17, I would still have people who would throw food, drinks, and once a rock at me, because it was what they had been told to do by teachers 7 years earlier. All I can do is make sure that my nieces and nephew never have to deal with him, and try to move on the best that I can. The last thing I heard of him was that he still coaches baseball and softball, and still teaches. He still lives in the same house he lived in when I had him as a teacher, though I have seen him around town. I have never once spoken to him since 5th grade, and one time, where we were close enough to each other that he could recognize me, I do not believe he knew who I was. That's my story of the worst bully I ever had. Not at the hands of a student, but from a teacher. I apologize if it does not belong in this sub. If it should be posted somewhere else, please be kind and point me towards where it should be posted. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I will try to answer what I can. If I'm unclear about anything particular, I'm very sorry. I'm writing this while I'm very tired, and I'm recalling an event that took place almost 20 years ago. Edit. Thank you for all those who have expressed kind words and warm wishes. When I posted this, I did not expect the story to get the amount of attention that it did, and it means a lot that so many of you agree that what took place was wrong. I especially did not expect for people to become so angry at John, that they had been requesting his information. If you read my responses, you will see that I am hesitant in releasing said information. To those who feel as though I should take action against him, please understand that what you are advising or suggesting is illegal, as I have no intent or desire to go to jail or commit a greater act of violence. I will not entertain any suggestions of doing so. So please guys, can we keep the "you need to kill him" comments to a minimum? So while I was reading all of these stories here, I remembered one of my own. I want to state beforehand that English is my second language, so I will come back to edit anything wrong with my grammar. I live in South America, and at the time I was 5 to 6 years old, and my family lived in a little house. The first one that my father ever bought. This house was situated in a very populated neighborhood. People living there didn't have a high income, but they were really nice and warm people. We knew almost everyone on our street, and me and my brother used to play outside until late at night with no trouble at all, except for me. There was a kid that lived a few houses from ours that was my own little bully. He was around my age, and I remember him distinctly because he had a really noticeable feature. Quite a few now that I think of it. He had lots of freckles and bright red-orange hair. I never really knew his parents, and they weren't really sociable, so the rest of the parents didn't really know about them either. When this kid was in the streets, it was my worst nightmare. He used to pull my hair, manhandle me. Note, I've always been a really small and fragile girl. Pinch my face and arms, and he always laughed while he was doing all of these things, even when I seemed extremely annoyed and scared. He scared me to the point that when I was out and saw him getting near me, I ran towards my house, which had a tall fence, and just stayed inside for the whole day. Looking back, I think there was something wrong with this boy, because he never talked, not a word. When I ran and closed the fence, which you could see through, he would stay there trying to get through it, throwing his arms inside and trying to stick his head in. He just creeped me out to no end. The tormenting stopped a little after my brother hit him once, because he was honestly getting too violent towards me. We finally moved from that old neighborhood when I was around 7 years old. Fast forward a few years later, I was 10 years old and I had long forgotten about this situation. I had accompanied my mom to do some errands. She had to quickly deliver something to a friend's house, so we went in the car. She parked the car across the street from her friend's house and told me it would be a few minutes, so she left me in the passenger seat with the window slightly cracked. She crossed the street and ringed her friend, and they just stayed there talking in the doorway. While I was waiting, I saw 3 boys walking towards the car, and I instantly felt like my stomach was turning upside down. He grew up, but I could still recognize him, even after 5 years. He looked at the car and caught me looking at him. He instantly put a serious face on and started walking faster towards the car. At this moment, I was just completely frozen. I wanted to yell for my mom, but she was across the street and wouldn't hear me yelling. Suddenly, he was out of my window. I kept looking straight, but I could feel him just staring at me. He didn't say a thing. Then he proceeded to try to open the door, which luckily was locked. Just when I felt a bit safer, he starts getting his head really close to the window like he was looking for something inside the car. I didn't get what he was trying to do. I mean, he couldn't enter through it anyways, so I just kind of stayed there waiting for it to be over. But just when I got what he had been looking for, he found it. He finally spotted the lock. Unfortunately, my car at the time had a lock just at the base of the window. He then gave me a big smile while looking at me dead in the eye. A big fucking terrifying smile. And he slowly started to get his arm through the window, obviously going for the locker. Now, I was pretty terrified and just wanted to get the fuck out of there. And that's just what I did. In one daring move, I got to the driver's seat, unlocked the doors, and got out running. Crossed the street without even looking, because fuck it. And then got to my mom, crying and shaking. When I looked back, he had the door open. It was still staring at me, smiling. My mother just screamed at him and told him to close the fucking door and leave, which he did, and just like that, it was all over. It's been more than 10 years since that happened, and I'm still trying to figure out what was wrong with him. Though I'm not anticipating another encounter. Creepy bully from my childhood, let's not meet again. So, back when I was around 6 or 7, I had a childhood bully. No shit, right? Everybody had some little prick who picked on them growing up. What makes him so different? Well, for several years, I had the same sentiment. That is until I gained information about him, his family, and his history. that made things much more terrifying looking back. There are 3 main events with him that shed plenty of light into who he is. My first memory with this kid is him cornering me on the playground and preventing me from leaving. The whole time I was pleading with him to just let me go home, mostly because I knew I couldn't fight him, as he was like a year or 2 older than me, and twice my size. Now, this isn't too alarming, especially as I was able to slip by him and run back home. But it was odd that he would go after me, because, not to brag, but I was a very nice kid at the time, and I had a lot of friends. Which brings up the other oddity. I hung around people who were pretty tough and were part of the older kids, and since this was a small town, everybody knew everybody, so this would be odd he would go after me since he must have known the people I was usually around. Now, the second event is much more alarming, especially since I don't even remember it. I only know it because my sister told me years after the fact. She told me at my bus stop. I was waiting to get on the bus, and she looked out the window only a couple of minutes after the fact. She saw me being choked by this kid, and she managed to scare him off. What really scares me is that I have no memory of it whatsoever, so I think he was choking me so hard that the oxygen couldn't reach my brain, which caused the memory loss. Which means, if she hadn't scared him off, I don't know what would have happened to me. But the third event is what truly gets me to this day. I was getting ready to head out and meet with my friends. Just as I was about to head out to the back door of my porch, my heart drops. I see him walking around my porch to the side of my house. I immediately closed the door and locked it. I was shitting bricks at this point, as I'm heading to my room, hoping he would just forget about me and leave. My other older sister told me something that I'll never forget. "Hey, is that kid your friend? He's been walking around the house for like the past 20 minutes. I had felt a giant pit in my stomach after I heard this, and now I knew he wasn't going to leave me alone. I told my sister to get him away and that he was bullying me. She did just that, and I never saw him around my house again. He was still a prick to me for a few years after the fact, but it never reached that level of disturbing again. I never saw him again after he and his brother were taken by child services. I didn't know what their parents did, but it must have been something terrible, since no one will tell me 12 years after the fact. What I do know is that their weird behavior was definitely inherited from their home life, which for the younger brother got way worse after the fact, as he tried and failed to molest somebody who's a young relative of mine, and that the older one's weird behavior, like pulling down his pants to show his ass, not out in a fuck you kind of display, more like he thought everybody wanted to see his ass. This is kind of when the gears started to turn in my head. I began to ask myself, what the hell was he going to do to me? I still don't have an answer. Honestly, this is what gets me. I always went out for several hours to play with friends, so would my family notice until it was too late? He already showed a violent streak, and if he was anything like his brother, he would have done something to me. What if I hadn't noticed him, and he got me before I would have the chance to escape? There's some woods behind my house, so there was a potential hiding space. All of this has circled through my thoughts for 3 months now, and I felt I needed to get it off my chest. All I can say now is that I hope they got some help, but I hope we never do meet again. As you can tell from the title, this Let's Not Meet is a bit of a throwback, 2006 to be exact. This is about my encounter with a guy I met online named Jared. I have no idea how he came across my profile on MySpace, because we have no friends in common, but he messaged me wanting to know about me. I saw that he only lived about 45 minutes north of me, and I remember thinking he was very attractive. Saw that we had a lot of the same interests, and I found his status really hilarious. Even though adding people I didn't know on MySpace was completely out of character for me, I'm introverted, private, and don't really like meeting new people, I decided to add him anyway. We started to message each other a lot, and he really piqued my curiosity because he was so different from all the guys I'd grown up with. His humor was a bit odd, but I still found him to be pretty hilarious. I remember using a friend's computer to talk to him one night, and she walked up behind me and said, "Who is that?" I told her I didn't know, but I liked him. She then says, "Ask him out." I thought, sure, why not? He only lives 45 minutes away, and he seems really cool. We exchanged phone numbers and set up a date for dinner that weekend. Jared told me to meet him at the grocery store near his house, and I could just follow him to his apartment in my car. I thought the idea sounded great. I pull up, and I only have to wait about 10 minutes or so until he got there. He pulled up right next to me, and I was immediately thrown off because even though it was dark at this point, I could still tell that right away he wasn't nearly as attractive as his profile pictures. I decided I wasn't going to be a shallow person and proceeded to follow him to his place. Here's where it gets weird. As we are driving down a two-way road, there is a succession of entrances to different apartment complexes, spaced about 15 feet in front of one another. Jared keeps turning on his blinker, turning in, and then swiftly turning back out, like he's trying to psych me out. I'll admit that the first time he did it was pretty funny. I thought, haha, you got me. However, that initial feeling quickly fades as he does it for nearly every single entrance on the way to his place, so maybe like 9 or 10 times. Now I'm just thinking, what the fuck is he doing? I actually became insulted and thought he was trying to lose me at this point. I keep on having to brake, cars are starting to build up behind me, and it's making the drive take forever because I keep having to slow down for this nonsense. Had I not been a naive 17-year-old, I would have followed my fuck this shit instinct and turned around and drove all the way back home. But no, of course not. I chalked all this up to his weird sense of humor and tried to give him a chance. We finally get to his apartment. We have a normal introduction and I walk into his place. It's a typical bachelor pad, I tell myself as I see the back of his entrance doors completely covered in porn. Think of an arrangement of the filthiest smut up to cover every inch of this 7-foot door. Okay, whatever. He's a single guy, I'm thinking. Maybe not the classiest guy, but a guy. Anyway, we get to talking and he's kinda quiet, but for the most part he's awkward and doesn't even know what to say. It's at this point that I notice he's wearing a really raggedy ass white t-shirt. Weird. It's been about 15 or 20 minutes since we have got to his place, just hanging out in his kitchen, and he begins to ask me personal questions. I start to taunt him about his awkwardness a little bit too, just to lighten the mood for a bit, and I just want him to change the topic. For example, he asked, "How much guys have you slept with?" And I retort, "Wow, very nice question to ask a girl on the first date, Jared. How'd you get this smooth?" He eats it up and thinks we're playing a game. This goes back and forth for about 10 minutes before I ask when we're ready to go out to dinner. He sort of snaps back into reality and says he has to change. Thank God he comes back looking pretty sharp. Maybe this night will turn out alright. I could not have been any more wrong. We get into his car, which is a pretty decent Mustang, to go to some place he wants to take me to for dinner. We're driving for about 15 minutes before he says he needs to make a detour to see a friend. Okay, I said. The friend walks up to my side of the door. They talk for a couple of minutes, and then the friend starts to get in the car. Jared looks at me and asks me to get in the back. At this point, this guy is really starting to get on my nerves. Could he be any more rude? I'm dying in the back seat, thinking that this is the worst, and I can't wait until he dumps this friend somewhere, because I'm starving, and I didn't want to drive all the way up here to hang out with two rude-ass strangers. I've no clue why he picks his friend up. I have a hunch because of how quick the interaction was that he was buying drugs, but I couldn't see into the front seat or hear over the blaring music. As we are driving, where I can only presume is back to the friend's place to drop him off, he starts driving very erratically, doing some of that stuff like he was whenever I had to follow him. Plus he starts turning sharp corners like he's Dale Earnhardt. I'm being tossed all over the back seat, and I see the friend is hanging on for dear life as well. Then I think it's all over. He turns to go to the neighborhood, but he has to cross a lane of oncoming traffic. As he's making his way through the turn, he stops. I freak out. All I can see is the headlights through the tiny backseat window shining coming right at us. Me and the friend in the front seat are just screaming nonsensely. I don't even remember what I said. I'm just screaming. As soon as we are almost rammed by a giant Cadillac that has to slam on their brakes so hard they fishtail, he peels out, completing the turn. I'm shocked. I don't even say anything. I wait until he drops his now totally calm and collective friend off and tell him I'd like to go home. He drives me back in complete silence, where we get to his place. He hurries over to my side and lets me out, but he is standing so close that I have to squeeze past him. As I'm trying to get out of his deathmobile, he places his hand he isn't holding the door open on the other side of me, trapping me between him and the car. I look at him and he's just staring at me. So I say, "I'm not gonna kiss you." He responds, "Oh, come on, let's go upstairs." I have to literally hold back like a guffaw. I tell him, "Okay, Jared, that's enough for one night. I'm going to go now, and I'll text you later, okay?" He's still staring intensely into my eyes, and I'm just praying that he lets me leave. He starts to shift away, and at the moment I think he's letting me go. He pushes his mouth onto mine so hard that I'm thrown into the side of the car. I struggle free and haul ass to my car, quickly look behind me, and see him just standing there. I start driving the long 45 minutes home in silence. I'm so relieved that I get to go home to my nice warm bed. All of a sudden I hear my phone, ding 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 ding. I hear about 20 messages coming in, and I look at my phone. I feel so sick. The texts read, "Hey, why did you leave? Please come back, I want to play more games with you. Is this a game? Do you want to play games? Okay, I'll give you 15 minutes to get back here. I'm counting now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I miss you. Please come back. I don't like this game at all." He sent all of that within a period of like 2 or 3 minutes. Around 10 minutes after I left. All I can remember is thinking, what is that? How can someone be so awesome online and then end up being a total weirdo? One last note. The next morning, my entire right half of my mouth and a bit underneath of my nose was swollen and bruised. So to my MySpace Jigsaw Tokyo Drift wannabe freak, let's not meet again. I've posted this story earlier on r/entitled parents and had a few suggestions that I posted here as well. I hope you guys enjoy it. So I have a friend who just recently been getting into these entitled parent stories. We eventually started talking about them and we laugh at the sheer stupidity of Darwin's failed experiments until last week. She began to be more and more quiet, and when I finally pressed her, she revealed that she's been coming across some of the stories of attempted kidnapping, and they reminded her of a night years ago. She never made a Reddit account, so she asked me if I could post it here. After telling me what happened, we're both still not sure if it fits here or not, but it's a story that if someone would ever find themselves in a similar situation, they may get some ideas to protect themselves. So without further ado, this is the story we titled The Bus Ride. Many moons ago in the early 2000s, my friend Sarah was going to the local state college. Now while the college was in the city, she lived out in the county with her father and would use the bus system to go to school. One afternoon after class, her and her friends went to one of their apartments to study for some exams. Well, the young and responsible young adults that they were studied for maybe 10 minutes before turning it into a more festive gathering. After a few hours, Sarah happened to glance at the clock, which caused her mind to snap. "Hey dumbass, what time does that late bus run?" Screaming profanities and prayers warding off her demise by her father, she quickly ran to the bus stop to catch its final trip of the night. With a huge sigh of relief, she flopped down into the seat in the back and threw her headphones on. Lost in thoughts of what elaborate tales to tell her father, she hadn't noticed a little boy walking up to her until she noticed movement out of the corner of her eye and sat down beside her. She managed to not recoil at the sight of the child because, while the child was completely filthy and reminded her of someone from the Great Depression, it was his creepy smile that she remembered most. He just sat there smiling at her until she slowly slid her headphones down and the following interaction began. "Sarah, hello, child, hello, Sarah, hello, child, you're pretty, Sarah, well thank you, child, what's your name?" Now Sarah had a policy of never giving any personal info to strangers, but kids were usually harmless in her opinion, but every alarm was going off in her head. "Sarah, Katie, child, that's a nice name, Sarah, well I like it." Then the kid just sits there, smiling at her. After a few minutes of smiling, the kid finally said, "You would make a great mom," and hops down and walked back to an even more dirty and unkempt monster of a man, whom she could only assume was the boy's father, because just like his son, he was smiling at her. When she looked at him, he nodded politely and kept smiling. She put her headphones back on and dug out a book and pretended to study, but she kept looking back and noticed both of them just smiling right at her. As each stop came up and went, she prayed that they would just get off the bus, but as the bus began to empty of other passengers, she soon found that it was just her, some middle-aged woman, and these two. The bus was beginning to slow for its next stop in a small town that had a series of restaurants. She couldn't take them anymore and decided it would be safer for her to go to one of the McDonald's and wait for her father than to sit on the bus any longer. So she gathered all her things and prepared to disembark. As she allowed the woman to pass, she noticed the man gathering their things. Oh hell no, she thought. But she didn't want to make it out like she was trying to avoid them. So she moved back to the seat near the front, sat back down. To her horror, she watched as the man and his son took another seat and sat back down, still smiling at her and nodding. Her anxiety was through the roof at this point, as she watched more stops come and go until her stop was coming up. What was she gonna do? Her mind raced. As the bus came to a stop, she gathered her things and watched in horror as the man gathered their things. Instead of getting off, she sat back down behind the driver. How much further till the end of the line? 3 more stops, the driver replied. Sarah then leaned in and told the driver about the man and his son, and asked if it was possible to have the police there when they arrived. The driver looked in the mirror and told her he'd take care of it. Sarah glanced back and her heart jumped into her throat as the little boy was still smiling at her. The father wasn't. She described it as the look a parent gives their child when they do something wrong and wait till we get home. Now Sarah was usually a strong individual, but she was in tears as she took out her phone and tried to call her father. It went straight to voicemail. Who else could she call? She finally decided to call her ex. He had been a disloyal piece of shit, but she could always rely on him when it counted most. Sarah, please answer. Jack, hello? As quiet as she could, she poured her heart out about what was happening and asked if he could meet her at the last stop. Jack, I'm at Rogers right now, and it's about 20 minutes to get there, but I'll get there as fast as I can. Sarah, please hurry, she begged. Finally, they came over the hill to where the final stop was. Frantically, she looked for something, anything that could help her, but there was nothing. Finally, the bus pulled in, and the door swung open. The man glared down at her, waiting for her to get off first. Driver, hold up, miss. I need to talk to you about your bus pass. The man stood there for a moment until the driver told him this was the last stop and he needed to get off. Man, I'm waiting for my driver. Sir, you need to get off. If you're waiting for her, she'll be on her way shortly, but I need you to get off now. Angrily, the man stomped off with his child in tow. As soon as they got off, the driver shut the door. Man, what the fuck? The man began yelling and banging on the door, and Sarah was scared he was going to break the glass until she noticed 2 police cars pull in, and then the piece of shit that Jack drove. The police ordered the man away to them, and she couldn't hear what was being said. Jack later revealed that the man was claiming that Sarah was his daughter, and he was taking her home. Once Jack asked her name, he said it was Katie. That was all she wrote. In the end, the man got in a fight with Jack and the officers, but was finally arrested. When she got home and told her father what happened, he tossed her the keys to his old '82 Ram and said she was never to ride the bus again. While it was loud and a pain to drive, she never felt safer, but she did ride the bus one final time after that, when she delivered a plate of cookies to the driver who saved her life. Edit. Well, I'm sitting here with Sarah and just went through the comments, and she says she cannot express the gratitude enough for all the support you guys are giving her. So since we have some time before work, she wanted to answer a few of the questions left behind. She says that she's been okay for a while now for the most part. She went to therapy and support of friends and family helped a lot. She still has trouble being alone, and she still has things that remind her of that night, like, as we said before, the stories of attempted kidnapping, because it makes her wonder what would have happened if things had turned out differently that night. Also, she never wanted to be someone who falsely accused someone, which is why she didn't act sooner. But as for the guy's intentions, he said that he was just selling Boy Scout cookies, but he never indicated that. As for the kid, she doesn't know what happened to him. Her mind was more focused on the father and getting the hell home ASAP. Added to the whirlwind of what just happened and how long ago this was, she thinks the child was taken with the father. As for the kid's behavior, she says she wasn't sure, but he might have had some kind of mental issues. She didn't ask. The excuse of, "she's my daughter," was told to her by her ex, since she was still on the bus. She was never told if he tried to use any other excuse besides the Boy Scout cookies. She wants to clear the air about Jack. The history behind them was that they started out as childhood friends as they grew up in the same neighborhood, but as they matured, Jack became a huge player and was going through women left and right. He doesn't recall why they both thought a relationship would work and When it failed, she acknowledged that and just how he was, and she knew what she was going into. But it didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. At least they were able to stay good friends afterwards. Anyways, that's the story. I hope you guys enjoy. This takes place in the early 2000s. So back in high school, I was a rather shy girl. This was during/after the recession, and my family had gotten a bit tight on money. Usually I didn't eat lunch, and I had to hide the fact of that from the staff at the school. So I studied in a library or sat outside on the field behind the school for lunch. Rarely had I ever eaten or sat in the lunchroom. As the school year went on and near its end, prom was coming up. I never had enough money for a prom dress, so I always turned down any offers to go, simply because I didn't want people to know that I couldn't afford a dress, let alone the ticket to get in. Between classes, I had to walk through the cafeteria. I noticed that there was a younger boy who would always stare at me. His friends would pat his shoulder, and I read under their lips as they said, "Ask her," to him. The group of boys just looked and smiled, except for the nervous one, simply staring at me. I would look away to the floor and grip my textbooks closer to my chest, walking down another hallway. Anyway, I kept finding ways to sort of get past him without noticing. Now, I know this sounds mean, but I didn't know him. I couldn't afford it, and I also felt like he was dark inside. It was like every time I saw him, all I saw was gray smoke around him, and there was a really uneasy feeling about it. Anyway, prom happened, and I lived right down the street from the high school, so I could hear the music and see all the kids driving down the road or walking to school in their cool new clothes. As I sat there looking at the lights and the kids, I decided it was stupid just to watch the event happen without me, so I made myself go to sleep. A week or so after prom, I heard other kids in school talking about something, almost whispering. Apparently the boy who wanted to ask me out to prom, he ended up asking another girl from another school. She said yes, but when he showed up at her house, her dad didn't like him and said she couldn't go with him. The boy then told the girl that he couldn't go to prom with her because something had come up and that he wouldn't be going to prom with her. The father and the boy talked about it, and the father said that if he paid a portion of her dress, then they could go. The kid went back to the house and cut the screen on the back door with a knife. Then he unlocked it. Her father woke up and asked him what he was doing there. The boy said, "I came to see you die," before charging at the father with a knife and a shovel. He managed to stab her dad 7 times. Her parents subdued the kid, and he was arrested and released on a $1,000 bond. The rest is history. So that's my prom story night. Oh yeah, the dad did survive, which was great. But yeah, I guess the title is more so the prom night and attempted murder. Three years ago, I was living with my then boyfriend in a 1-bedroom apartment in a little mountain town. It was a half basement unit, so the bottom of our windows were level with the ground outside. It was also an older apartment, but not all the windows could fully lock. One day, my boyfriend comes home from work, and while I'm laying on the sofa, he immediately runs up to the window near me and looks out of it frantically. He then goes out to look at every other window in the house. Then he walks around the outside looking in the windows. When he comes back from this confusing trip, I ask him what the fuck's going on and why he's being a spaz. "I think I just walked up on a dude looking in the window at you. He took off as I walked up to him," he says to me. This was, naturally, very unsettling, but after discussing it and considering the time of day, it was about 2 p.m. and the number of people out and about around the complex at the time, we came to a conclusion that it was just a curious neighbor or someone passing by that happened to glance in. With that, we forgot about it. If only that was the end. For the next couple of months, odd stuff happened here and there. Someone would knock on the door occasionally, then when I went to answer it, no one would be there. I'd find things in my apartment that I wasn't familiar with, or things like clothing items that would vanish. I didn't really think twice about any of it until one night. My boyfriend and I were arguing around 1 or 2 in the morning, and we were being a little loud. We were standing in the kitchen, face to face. His back was to the window, with the blinds up halfway, and I was facing it. Amidst our arguing, I glanced behind him at the window, thinking I saw the reflection of my face in it. The window was open, It wasn't my face. There was a man with his face pressed almost against the window screen watching us. Given the fact that we were arguing and it was late, I thought for a moment that it might have been a concerned neighbor walking up to the window to speak to us. A main walkway for the complex was right on the other side of our window, so I spoke to him. "Hello, can I help you?" I asked a little aggressively, thinking a neighbor was intruding on our privacy. He responded to this by staring, unwavering and cold, right at me. His face did not change expression. He did not blink or move, just looked right at me in a way I've never been looked at before or since. In this instant, I also realized that because of the window being level with the ground, the only way this man's face could be where it was if he was laying on the ground outside the apartment or crouched and contorted to look into my window. My heart sank. I buried my face in my boyfriend's chest and closed my eyes in fear. My boyfriend, up to this point, thought I was fucking with him. When I buried my face in his chest, only then did he say, "Is there really someone out the window?" I whispered a very scared yes to him. He felt my fear and took a moment before he turned around. By the time he did, the man was gone. It was at this point I started to think about all the little odd occurrences that I've been experiencing. I assumed the worst. I filed a police report with his description, and my brother loaded my apartment up with weapons to protect me, or at least inform this peeping Tom that I was armed. After that night, myself, my boyfriend, and my brother were all on high alert. There were a couple times when my brother came over that he saw a sketchy dude hanging around, and even one time saw him at my window. He tried to follow him discreetly, but the guy took off running as soon as my brother stepped in his direction. The last night I had an experience with this man. I was sitting alone on my sofa. My boyfriend has work at a restaurant about 2 blocks away. He picked me up from work an hour earlier. We had sat on the sofa together a little while when we got home. Then he kissed me and left for work, locking the door behind him. After he left, I continued to sit on the couch on Reddit for a while in silence. After about an hour of me sitting there in silence, I hear the door creak open. It's a small apartment, so to see the bedroom and bathroom doors from the couch, all I had to do was lean a little to the left. I assumed it was one of my cats coming out of my bedroom, so you can imagine my shock when I lean over and see a door opening that's the door to the water heater closet. I look to my right to see my cat sleeping soundly at the other end of the couch. I look back to the door and it's still creaking open very slowly. It opens enough for me to see it, a set of fingers wrapped around the door, easing the door ever so gently to open it as quietly as possible. That's a no for me. I ran my barefoot ass out the door into the snow and down the street to my boyfriend's work. I called the cops. When everybody was back to check out the apartment, he was, of course, gone. After that, my boyfriend and I packed our shit, went to stay with my parents, and 6 months later moved 1,000 miles away from that town. That was the end of it. I initially found this sub around that time as I was trying to find other stories similar to mine, or people to talk to who had experienced something like that. I had intended to write my story here eventually, and I had figured after this week's events I had to. I live 1,000 miles away from where all this happened, so a part of me thinks there's no way this person could have found me. But last week, I heard a knock on my front door of my apartment. I was expecting a package, so I figured it was a delivery driver, and I didn't answer. I'd go get the package later. Then they knocked again, and again. The third one made me feel uneasy, so I waited a good 20 minutes to check the door. When I did, there was no package, no note, no nothing. Someone was just knocking. Although it made me uneasy, I didn't initially think back to my stressful experience in my last town. Then 2 days ago, I went out to get groceries. I have a little patio, and I go out there in the mornings just to chill or check on plants a lot, and I've been known to leave it unlocked in the day on accident sometimes. I never really thought of it as a huge deal until I came home from the store 2 days ago, and the deadbolt to my apartment was locked. The deadbolt can only be locked from the inside of the apartment, period. I assumed someone robbed me because I dumbly left my patio unlocked. I called my sister. I called my current boyfriend. I waited for people to be with me, and I went into my apartment through the sliding glass patio door. Nothing was out of place. Nothing of value was taken. At this point, my heart sank. Nothing was touched. Nothing was stolen. Someone was inside my apartment just because they wanted to be inside of my apartment. I told my boyfriend about my stalker, and he's not taking this shit lightly like my past boyfriend. I filed a police report. We checked for recording devices and cameras. He put Nest cameras all over the place, and we're on high alert. I really truly hope this is a coincidence, but if this man really followed me across multiple state lines, I don't know. But there's no one on earth I'm less interested in meeting than this guy, so let's hopefully never meet. I just found this sub recently, and I don't think my story's of the same caliber as most, but I believe it's worth sharing. To give a little backstory, I started dating my current boyfriend when I was 16, and my boyfriend was 15. Now I'm 20, and he's 19. He had just moved to the area out of the state and didn't really know anyone yet. It was kind of a bad area, so when his parents found out the landlord/neighbor had a son that went to our school, they encouraged him to hang out with the kid. I wish I could show you all how creepy he looked to begin with. He was a creepy looking redneck stoner type with a lanky build and red hair. We could tell the kid had some slight issues and even discussed it in private. He didn't really pick up social cues very well, smoked a ton of weed, and didn't take no for an answer. We were extremely nice to him for a long time and would always be courteous at worst when he would come over. But we soon realized that his issues were worse than we initially thought. He would open the door and come in, making himself at home all the time, and he would just walk in with a blunt or pipe and start smoking weed right there in our house. Eventually, it was an everyday routine. Get home from school, there he is, staying until you forced him out, trying to convince you to let him stay when you're going to bed. He would make up excuses like, "Man, I just wanted to use your Netflix." Over the next few months, it became obvious that no amount of sugarcoating would get him to leave us alone. Just smoking weed all the time there was an issue. My boyfriend's dad and uncle were living there, and they both were recovering drug addicts. Not that weed was a hard drug, but it gave this kid the chance to introduce them to K2. His uncle got heavily addicted to K2 and ended up stealing all kinds of money to feed his habit. And guess what? The neighbor always stole his uncle's K2 to get a known addict addicted to something you want so you can take it when they buy it. I honestly don't know why this family didn't do something about this kid at this point. When just my boyfriend and I were home, he would come over and knock on the door over and over again. You would think that someone might linger up on your porch for a few minutes before giving up, but no, he would stay for 2 to 3 hours at a time. He would knock for an extended amount of time, take a quick break and smoke some weed on my front porch, and then continue knocking. My boyfriend and I would close all the blinds in the house before leaving for school, or else we wouldn't be able to walk around after school. He would see us from the window and tell us to let him in. I ended up getting a license in a car, which would turn out to be a huge problem. Before, we could simply pretend we weren't there. His parents would be at work, so their car would be gone. But now my car was the big sign screaming, "We're home," and he used it to his advantage. His knocking turned into shooting BB pellets at the windows of my boyfriend's room and trying to open the windows, pulling and pushing on the door to try to break it open. Yet when my boyfriend's parents were home, he would act like nothing happened. He would still be unbearable, demanding, take things without asking. He would come in if the door was unlocked, but didn't knock for hours. They believed us when we told them how he was acting, but they asked us to continue doing what we were doing because they wanted to stay on good terms with the landlord. Due to unrelated teenage angst and drama, my boyfriend and I would split up for a bit. You know, the teenage breaks where you're still together but don't have a title or whatever? Yeah, it was one of those. We spent the same amount of time together, but I guess the neighbor saw things differently. He started telling my boyfriend's mom that he really wanted to have sex with me and steal me away from our son. Creepy? I think very. It didn't take long for the Facebook messages to come pouring in. None of them were explicitly sexual, but he would ask me to give him rides to school and hang out with him alone. He told me that I was too good for my boyfriend and that he wanted to treat me better. It only took a day of this for me to block him. So eventually he went back to his usual banging on the door for hours technique. My boyfriend's parents knew by now that the situation was out of hand and they moved into a new rental as quickly as they could, and it was long overdue. The new place is about 5 miles away and nobody told him where their new address was, but he found my car and started visiting there too. It wasn't until my boyfriend's parents got a large protective dog that he stopped coming around. They had dog sat her before, and she had always tried to bite him, but she went crazy when he showed up to the new house, her house. We knew he was there before he even knocked on the door, because she went batshit crazy. He opened the door and she tried to attack him. He was prepared since he heard her barking and closed the door quickly. We told him he needed to leave and he couldn't come back. The landlord wasn't an issue anymore since they moved. Since then, 2 years ago, he's shown up twice to ask for money, but only if someone is outside. If my car is there, he will knock on the back door, which is connected to my boyfriend's room. It's only happened a few times, but we don't answer that door anymore. I believe that if I hadn't gotten that dog, he would have continued harassing us continually until the police were involved. Bad things happen when you're too nice to the wrong people. This all happened 11 years ago when I was 16. All of my interactions with this creeper happened on the internet, so I hope this is the right place for this. And if this sounds kinda disjointed, I apologize. This is my first time I've really talked about this. To add, I'm female. I had a friend that introduced me to this guy she knew on the internet, and I started instant messaging him because she said he was a friend of a relative. A lot of my friends were talking with him at the time, and me and the friend even video chatted with him once. I had a computer in my room at this time, so I talked to him a lot more than my parents realized at the time. Well, the IMing session slowly got more sexual. He had convinced me that I shouldn't stay at my home, and that I should run away. He also convinced me to break up with my boyfriend at the time. This guy had my stupid 6-year-old self completely brainwashed. My friend that introduced me to him was also going to run away with me, and we were going to meet this guy in New York. So we arranged it so I can spend the night at her house that night, so we can run away together. That night, we sneak our stuff outside and tell our parents we're going to go for a walk. We were going to walk to the bus station and get tickets all the way up there. We walked a bit, but we weren't going to make it to the bus stop, so we looped back around to her house. At this point, she decides that she isn't going to go, but convinces me that I should still go. So in the morning, I leave a note for my parents and call a taxi. It picks me up and drives me to the bus station. The driver knew something was up and was casually asking me questions about where I was going and who I was going to meet. We got to the bus station and I go inside to buy my ticket. I'm sitting there as the clerk is getting my ticket ready and my dad pulls up like a bat out of hell. To this day, I'm grateful I left that note. He had a hunch that I was going to the bus station, and he had drove so fast that his Astro van was on 2 wheels at some points. My dad gets me and my stuff, and we head home. At this point, I realized just how stupid I had been and break down. My parents asked me all the questions about what I was doing and why. They also call the cops. A few months go by, and an FBI agent calls them, wanting to talk to me and take my computer. My mom and I talked to the agent for a while, and he informs us that they believe that they had this same guy in custody right now for luring other girls to him. He showed me a photo and an ID as the same guy. He takes my computer, but they don't find anything on it but a few conversations, since my old friend that introduced me to him had wiped it pretty good. Luckily, they didn't need me in court to convict the guy. They just had some of the other girls that made it all the way to him do it. To this day, I'm grateful that I left that note, and that my dad had listened to his instincts and found me before I got on that bus. I also found out that the cab driver waited outside where I couldn't see him because he figured I was a runaway. I believe he even called the cops and was waiting for them to show up. That man will always have my gratitude, and I was lucky enough that after we had told my boyfriend what happened, we got back together. We had been married for 8 years now and have a little girl. And you can bet she will never have a computer in her room, and I will tell her the story when she is old enough. Well, first off, let me explain some things before I get going with this story. This happened when I was only recently figuring out that I was gay, and I hadn't quite come out to everyone yet. And those who I had come out to, well, it was kinda awkward. I must have been at least 17, but please don't judge me for my stupidity that follows. Well, it was a weekend during the day, and I was browsing this online dating site. I had never dated anyone before, being a late lesbian bloomer, so I was really excited and curious to eventually find someone great. Keep in mind that I was most certainly not looking for hookups. I messaged a couple people who sound nice, and I'm about to log off when this person messages me. They don't have much info on their page and just have one picture, but I decided to humor this person and have a conversation. We hadn't talked for long before this person says that we should meet up. She didn't live too far from me, so it wasn't undoable. However, the moment she said that we could meet up, red bells started going off in my head. I've always been a careful person and never wanted to take risks. However, I had recently been worrying that I was too careful and that I might be missing out because I wasn't seizing the moment and just jumping into things feet first. I thought I needed to loosen up a bit and get out of my comfort zone. Anyways, I end up agreeing to meet this person, and the place she arranges I meet her at is around 20 minutes away. Another red bell that goes off is that she tells me to wear a dress or a skirt. I hated dresses and skirts, so I don't actually own any. Therefore, I just wear shorts. Before I head out, I tell my friend where I'm going. That was the one smart thing that I did do. I told her the location I was heading, and if I hadn't texted her again around 2 hours later, she should take action. I jokingly said that if I hadn't contacted her within that time frame, then I'd probably been kidnapped or sold as a sex slave. She wanted to know what I was up to, but I refused to tell her. So I tell my mom I'm going to the store, and I head out to meet the person. The place that she told me to go is kind of in a sketchy neighborhood, but I'm going because I remind myself that I'm too nervous all the time. I arrive at the park that she specified, and to my relief, there was one other person there, a lady with her child. I keep a close eye on this lady and find great comfort in her presence. I wait at the park for a while. I had arrived at the specific place and at the specific time, but where was the girl? I leave around a half hour later. The lady was probably really confused as to why I was there, because I had just arrived, stood there by the fence for half an hour, and then left. I make the drive back home and go on my computer to find out what happened. The person explains that she arrived, but she had been spooked because there's a car full of creepy guys that had driven by. She asked me to return to the place. I say no, and she starts to beg me and tries to dirty talk me. I wasn't into it because, as I said, I wasn't into the one-night stand business. The person then states that she had seen me and that I looked cute in my pink shorts. This I found kinda creepy because whoever this was had been spying on me from afar. At that point, I just shut down the whole conversation and log off. It didn't occur to me until quite a while later, but the person probably never arrived at the park because the lady with her child was there. The online profile was probably fake and was actually some dude trying to pick up lesbians. Some creepy dude. The dude probably had been waiting in his car for the lady and her child to leave before he was going to make his move. Whether that be mugging or sexually harassing me, or both, I don't want to know. It was in a pretty deserted area of the neighborhood, so no one would have heard me if I had yelled for help. So now that I'm older and wiser, sometimes I'll think back to this day and I'll send silent thanks to this random lady who probably saved me from something terrible. Nowadays, I listen to my gut and don't worry about being too timid or too careful. Those kind of things keep you safe. So creeper internet person, let's not meet again. Hi everyone, so this happened about a year ago, and it's still pretty freaky. For context, my friend and I are both 22 female. My friend Anna and I were bored one weekend and decided to go to a popular beach to take some pictures and just mess around. So we took some pictures and had a really lovely day. Then on the way back, we were starving and decided to stop at McDonald's in the beach town. The town was really famous and nice. All the celebrities live there, and it's beautiful. There's also a super famous restaurant right off the highway on the beach that's known for celebrities and rich people going. This McDonald's was directly across the street from the restaurant. Since so many famous people go to this restaurant, and it's on a pretty busy road, most of them have drivers that take them, usually in a big black Escalade. The drivers would usually hang out in the parking lot of the McDonald's while their bosses ate across the street. Ian and I didn't know this at the time. We just wanted a McFlurry. So we go to the McDonald's, and right when we get out of the car, she starts acting really weird. She triple checks that the car doors are locked and grabs her fancy camera to bring inside. I ask her what's up, and she says there's a group of guys, the drivers, standing in front of the McDonald's, smoking and staring at us, and it was giving her the creeps. I'm a pretty chill and trusting person, so I don't really think much of it. It's a busy place in a super nice town, so I'm not too worried. We go in, and there are a few other people in there about our age. We get our food and sit at the table to eat. One of the drivers come in and sits a few booths down with his back to the wall, right where he can see us. My back is to him, but Anna gets really creeped out and wants to leave. This guy isn't eating or anything, he's just staring at us. Again, this is a pretty crowded McDonald's in one of the nicest towns in Southern California, so I feel pretty safe. Living in South Central, you get used to the odd creeps. Still, Anna was freaked out, and I decided to just go along with her. I just had to run to the bathroom first. It was one of those McDonald's where the counter and the main dining room were in one big room, and then there was sort of a hallway off to the side of the counter with more seating in the bathroom at the end, way in the back. There was also a door going outside right next to the bathrooms. The bathroom has only 2 stalls. I just walked into the first stall, not really paying attention to whether or not anyone else was in there. So I'm in there doing my thing, and then I hear the door open, and I hear Anna call my name. At this point, I'm very confused since she's supposed to be watching her stuff. I'm like, yeah, what's up? She asks, are you okay? Yeah, just pissing, I reply. She was like, oh, okay, and just stands there in the doorway. After a second, I hear her leave, and I'm thinking, that's very weird. So I walk out of the bathroom and see her waiting by the door with all of her stuff in her hands. I ask her what's going on and why she came into the bathroom, and she just looks at me very panicky and says we need to leave right now. At this point, I'm still not afraid, just confused. We rush out to the car, and she starts telling me what happened. Turns out, when I walked into the bathroom, the creepy driver followed me and came inside a little bit after. I don't remember hearing him come in, but maybe I did and just assumed someone had either been in the stall next to me and was leaving, or just came to check up their makeup or something. I'll be honest, I really wasn't paying attention. I know for sure I wasn't aware that anyone had entered the stall next to me because he didn't close the stall door when he came in. She was on her phone, so she didn't seem to follow me either. A young guy noticed it and went up to my friend, asking if we knew the driver at all. Frantically, she told him that we did not know the driver and ran to check on me. He was in the stall next to me with the stall door open. It was a large handicap stall, not making a sound. She came in and didn't see him, so she called my name to make sure I was still alive, and he rushed out of the stall past her. She was in shock and didn't know what to do other than gather things and prepare to run. When we went to her car, he was sitting in his big black car with tinted windows next to us, just staring. We sped off, and when I got the story, we called the McDonald's to let them know what happened. They didn't really care at all. And then we called the non-emergency sheriff to report it as well, which was closed. Thank you, Malibu, for nothing. Eventually, my mom went on full mama bear and threatened to blast it all over social media until they took my report seriously and got a hold of someone at corporate from there. They checked their cameras and saw the guy follow me in. A police report was made, so hopefully this never happens to anyone else again. Thank God nothing happened, but it was really scary. The guy was sitting in his car staring at us when we left. Who knows what he was planning on doing then? So guy in the McDonald's bathroom, let's not meet again. Edit. A family friend who used to be a cop told us this isn't all that uncommon. A lot of the time, they just film the girl in the stall, which is obviously creepy but not violent. In this case, the red flag is that he didn't close the stall door, and I never saw anything. which made us think he was waiting to catch me off guard when I turned to wash my hands or something. Scary no matter what. Always be aware of your surroundings and trust your gut, or in my case, your friend's gut. Hey all, I'm a long-time lurker and first-time poster, so please go easy. To preface this all, it was Valentine's Day and me and my girlfriend are in college at a small school in Kentucky. Due to the way that the college works, it's hard for a lot of students to afford to keep up with having their cars on the campus. This means you typically have to walk everywhere, unless you have a bike. I was among the unlucky this semester. The evening had rolled around, and we were thinking of semi-romantic things we could do together, and we arrived upon ordering food off of Uber Eats. Not the most glamorous, but I offered to pay. Most of the restaurants were closed, but Taco Bell was open, so naturally, we ordered from there. Unbeknownst to us, though, there were no actual drivers at that time. Probably due to the road conditionings at the time, it was freezing and snowy. So the app defaulted to the setting where you can walk and pick it up. There wasn't an option to cancel it, so I decided I would walk the 1.5 miles to go pick up the food. I know most people at this point wouldn't be keen on walking in the snowy freezing conditions at this point of the night, but I'm a broke college student who just spent his last few spare dollars on food, so with a hug and a kiss from my girlfriend, I started off on my journey to get some food. Walking through campus at night isn't a problem for me, since I'm a 5'9" male, but you make it through campus and into the residential areas of town, that's where things tend to get sketchy. I made it through campus and was about a quarter of the way to my destination when in the distance, I saw another man walking down the streets. Initially, two things put me at unease. The first one being that he was wearing one of those long trench coat things that you typically associate with sketchy men, and the other being the conditions out. I mean, logically, no one should be walking around in these conditions, as they were literally cold enough to freeze the sweat in your hair. I pushed these thoughts back, assuming he was either in a similar situation as me, or he just really enjoyed the weather. I did switch sides of the streets though, as I'm a tad socially awkward and hate talking to random people I don't really know. We both continue our walks and pass one another, and it seemingly goes off without a hitch. Neither of us acknowledged one another and just kept walking. Being the wary person I was, I looked over my shoulder often in these kinds of situations. He was walking the same direction he had been. Good. I kept walking and still throwing the occasional glance over my shoulder for safety. After about 2 minutes, after me and the mystery man had passed, I cast a glance over my shoulder and I noticed the man was now walking in my direction and a bit faster than I was walking. This creeped me the fuck out and I started to walk a bit faster. I couldn't flat out run because of the road conditions. They were too icy. At this point, I noticed the man picked up speed too until we were side by side on the opposite sides of the streets. When he caught up to me, he started yelling at me and saw something fall from the sleeve of his jacket, like he was concealing it of some sort. Only it had fell into the ground and made a loud clatter like a piece of metal or some large metal knife. At this moment, I grasped the danger of the situation and my fight or flight instincts kick in, ready to defend myself. I pull out my pocket knife as I noticed him starting to make his way across the street. It was at this moment that I said something to effort of, "Hey man, I don't want any trouble. I've got a knife on me." At this point, the man stopped in his tracks and said, "Oh, I thought you were someone else who just attacked me." I played it off cool by replying, "It seems that you've got the wrong person, my dude." And then he said a quick "yeah" and retreated to his side of the street and continued in the other direction. I thought I was safe. I continued on my hike to the Taco Bell, and after this experience, I was all the more wary because of the potential danger of having two creepy men out on the streets. As I was looking over my shoulder, I noticed the man from before on the same path that I was, and just walked as fast as I could to the Taco Bell, while throwing glances over my shoulder. Except at some point, the man just mysteriously vanished. I made it back to the college campus without any more events, but I had a hand on my pocket knife at all times. To this day, I have no clue what this man's intentions were. Well, they didn't seem good. As a creepy dude who possibly tried to mug or kill me, let's not meet again.